The vast expanse of Eastern Europe in the centuries preceding the emergence of the Rus presents a complex tapestry of indigenous peoples, nascent trade networks, and the earliest stirrings of what would become one of history's most significant cultural syntheses. Archaeological excavations across the Dnieper, Volga and northern river systems reveal a landscape far from empty, populated by sophisticated societies whose material culture and settlement patterns would profoundly influence the later development of Rus's civilization. The Dnieper river basin, stretching from the Valdai Hills to the Black Sea, served as the primary artery for human settlement and cultural exchange throughout the first millennium AD. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Chernigov and Kiev indicates continuous habitation dating back to the Paleolithic period, with Bronze Age settlements showing increasingly sophisticated agricultural practices and metalworking techniques. The Chernigov culture, flourishing between the 2nd and 5th centuries AD, left extensive traces of fortified settlements along the middle Dnieper, characterized by distinctive pottery styles, advanced ironworking, and evidence of long-distance trade connections extending to the Roman Empire. Excavations at Gnezdovo, near modern Smolensk, have uncovered one of the most significant archaeological complexes in Eastern Europe, revealing layers of occupation spanning several centuries. The site's strategic position at the confluence of trade routes demonstrates the importance of river junctions in early settlement patterns. Burial mounds at Gnezdovo contain artifacts ranging from Byzantine coins to Scandinavian weapons, indicating the cosmopolitan nature of these early trading centres. The presence of Arabic silver dirhams in substantial quantities suggests established commercial relationships extending far beyond the immediate region. The Volga River system presented an equally complex archaeological landscape, with Finno-Ugric peoples establishing permanent settlements along its banks as early as the 1st millennium BC. The Dyakovo culture, centred around the upper Volga and Oka rivers, developed distinctive hill forts characterised by elaborate earthwork defences and evidence of specialised craft production. Archaeological findings from these sites include bone and antler tools, iron weapons, and pottery decorated with intricate geometric patterns that would later influence Slavic decorative traditions. Finno-Ugric tribal territories extended across vast swaths of northern and central Russia, with the Meria people occupying the region between the Volga and Oka rivers, while the Muroma controlled territories along the lower Oka. These groups developed sophisticated fishing and hunting economies, supplemented by limited agriculture in favourable locations. Their settlements typically featured semi-subterranean dwellings, constructed with wooden frameworks and covered with earth, designed to withstand the harsh northern winters. Archaeological evidence suggests these communities maintained extensive trade networks, exchanging furs, amber and honey for metal goods and luxury items from southern regions. Baltic tribal territories encompassed much of present-day Lithuania, Latvia, and parts of Belarus and northwestern Russia. The Baltic peoples, including the Prussians, Lithuanians, and Latvians, developed distinct material cultures characterized by sophisticated metalworking, particularly in bronze and iron. Their burial practices, involving elaborate grave goods and distinctive pottery styles, provide insight into complex social hierarchies and belief systems. Archaeological sites such as those near Lake Peipus reveal fortified settlements with evidence of specialized craft production and long-distance trade connections. The ancient trade routes connecting the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea and Byzantine Empire through river networks represented one of the most significant economic and cultural phenomena of the pre-Rus period. These waterways, later known collectively as the route from the Varangians to the Greeks, facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and peoples across vast distances. The northern terminus of this route system began in the Baltic, where Scandinavian traders could access the Neva River and Lake Ladoga, continuing south through the Volkhov River to Lake Ilmen and the Lovat River. From Lake Ilmen, traders faced the crucial portage to the Dnieper system, a journey that required intimate knowledge of local geography and the cooperation of indigenous peoples. Archaeological evidence from portage sites reveals the establishment of permanent settlements to facilitate this transfer of goods, with specialized equipment for moving heavy cargo overland. These portage points became focal points for cultural exchange, where Scandinavian, Slavic, and Finno-Ugric peoples interacted regularly. The Dnieper Rapids, located south of present-day Kiev, presented both an obstacle and an opportunity for ancient traders. Constantine VII, Porphyrogenitus, later documented the names of these rapids in both Slavic and Norse languages, suggesting their significance to multiple cultural groups. Archaeological investigation of sites near the rapids reveals evidence of seasonal camps where trading expeditions would wait for favourable conditions to navigate the treacherous waters. These locations became centres of cultural synthesis, where different peoples shared knowledge of river navigation, local geography, and trading practices. Early Scandinavian exploration into the Eastern European river systems began as seasonal trading expeditions, driven by the demand for luxury goods in Western Europe and the availability of valuable commodities in the East. Archaeological evidence from Staraya Ladoga, one of the earliest Scandinavian settlements in Eastern Europe, indicates continuous occupation from the mid-8th century AD. The site's strategic location at the confluence of the Volkhov River and the Ladoga Canal provided access to both the Baltic trade network and the interior river systems. Scandinavian traders brought with them distinctive material culture, including characteristic boat construction techniques, weapon styles, and decorative arts. Their presence is archaeologically detectable through the distribution of specific artifact types, including oval brooches, Thor's hammers, and distinctive sword types. However, these early Scandinavian expeditions were not conquest-oriented, but rather focused on establishing trading relationships with indigenous peoples. The seasonal nature of these early expeditions is evidenced by the archaeological record, which shows periods of intensive activity alternating with apparent abandonment at many sites. This pattern suggests that Scandinavian traders initially maintained their primary residences in Scandinavia while conducting extended trading voyages during favourable seasons. The gradual transition from seasonal to permanent settlement is visible in the archaeological record through changes in building construction, the establishment of workshops, and evidence of year-round activities. Indigenous peoples of Eastern Europe demonstrated remarkable adaptability in their interactions with both early Slavic migrations and Scandinavian trading expeditions. The Finnic tribes, including the Veps, Chud, and Meria, possessed extensive knowledge of river navigation and forest resources that proved invaluable to foreign traders. Archaeological evidence suggests these groups actively participated in long-distance trade networks, serving as intermediaries between Scandinavian traders and more distant indigenous communities. The relationship between indigenous peoples and incoming Slavic populations appears to have been largely peaceful, based on archaeological evidence showing gradual cultural blending rather than signs of violent conquest. Slavic settlement patterns typically involve the establishment of new communities in previously unoccupied areas, suggesting a process of gradual territorial expansion rather than displacement of existing populations. This pattern is particularly evident in the archaeological record of the Upper Dnieper region, where Slavic and Finno-Ugric material cultures appear alongside each other without evidence of conflict. Nomadic groups, including various Turkic peoples and the Khazars, played crucial roles in the development of trade networks and political structures in Eastern Europe. The Kazakh Khaganate, with its capital at Itil on the Volga Delta, controlled much of the lower Volga trade route and maintained diplomatic relations with both the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world. Archaeological evidence from Khazar sites reveals a sophisticated urban culture, with evidence of diverse religious practices and extensive commercial activities. The interaction between sedentary and nomadic peoples created a complex web of relationships that would profoundly influence the later development of Rus's society. Nomadic groups provided military expertise and knowledge of steppe warfare, while sedentary populations contributed agricultural surplus and craft specialization. This symbiotic relationship is evidenced in archaeological sites where nomadic and sedentary material cultures appear together, suggesting periods of peaceful coexistence and mutual benefit. The material culture of pre-Slavic Eastern Europe reveals sophisticated technological traditions that would later influence Rus's development. Metalworking techniques, particularly in iron and bronze, reached high levels of sophistication among various indigenous groups. Archaeological finds include elaborately decorated weapons, jewellery and tools that demonstrate advanced craftsmanship and artistic sensibilities. These technological traditions were gradually incorporated into Slavic material culture through processes of cultural exchange and intermarriage. Pottery traditions among indigenous peoples show remarkable diversity and sophistication, with distinctive regional styles that persisted even after Slavic settlement. The integration of these ceramic traditions into Slavic culture is visible in archaeological assemblages, where traditional Slavic pottery types appear alongside indigenous forms, eventually leading to hybrid styles that combined elements from multiple traditions. Agricultural practices among pre-Slavic peoples varied considerably based on environmental conditions and cultural preferences. The fertile black earth regions of the forest steppe zone supported intensive grain cultivation, while northern forest zones relied more heavily on slash-and-burn agriculture supplemented by hunting, fishing and gathering. These diverse agricultural strategies provided models for later Slavic settlers, who adapted their farming practices to local environmental conditions. The religious and spiritual practices of indigenous peoples left subtle but significant traces in the archaeological record. Burial practices, votive deposits, and sacred sites reveal complex belief systems that often incorporated elements of shamanism, ancestor worship, and nature reverence. These spiritual traditions would later influence the development of Slavic paganism and, indirectly, the eventual Christianization of the Rus. The transformation of Eastern Europe during the 6th through 8th centuries represents one of the most significant demographic and cultural shifts in medieval history. Archaeological evidence from across the Carpathian Basin indicates that, by the late 5th century, Slavic populations had begun their systematic eastward expansion from their presumed homeland in the region between the Vistula and Oder rivers. This migration was not a sudden exodus, but rather a gradual process spanning several generations, driven by a combination of population pressure, climatic changes, and the political upheavals that followed the collapse of Hunnic power in Central Europe. The earliest Slavic settlements east of the Carpathians appear in the archaeological record around 550 AD. Concentrated initially along the upper reaches of the Dniester and Prut rivers. These pioneering communities established the characteristic Slavic settlement pattern that would define their expansion. Small agricultural villages positioned near reliable water sources, typically consisting of 10 to 20 semi-subterranean dwellings arranged in loose clusters. The houses themselves, known from excavations at sites like Rashkov and Salishta, featured rectangular floor plans measuring approximately 4 by 5 metres, with central hearths and storage pits carved directly into the earthen floors. The material culture of these early Slavic settlers shows distinct continuity with their Western predecessors, while gradually incorporating elements from the indigenous populations they encountered. Pottery assemblages from 6th century sites reveal the characteristic handmade vessels with rough surfaces and minimal decoration that define early Slavic ceramic traditions. Iron tools, including ploughshares, sickles, and axes, demonstrate the agricultural focus of these communities, while the relative scarcity of weapons suggests the peaceful nature of the initial expansion phase. As Slavic populations moved eastward, they encountered the complex river systems that would become the backbone of their civilization. The Dnieper River, with its extensive network of tributaries, provided both a transportation route and a source of fertile alluvial soils ideal for agriculture. Archaeological evidence from sites along the middle Dnieper, including Monastyrishche and Kotomel, reveals the establishment of larger settlements by the 7th century, some containing over 50 structures and showing evidence of specialised craft production. The process of Slavic settlement along major waterways followed predictable patterns based on environmental and strategic considerations. Communities typically established themselves on elevated terraces above river floodplains, providing protection from seasonal flooding while maintaining access to water transportation and fertile bottomlands. The spacing between settlements averaged 15 to 20 kilometres, suggesting territorial organisation based on the productive capacity of surrounding agricultural lands and the practical limits of community defence. Archaeological investigation of these riverine settlements reveals increasingly sophisticated defensive arrangements as Slavic communities grew in size and wealth. The earliest fortifications consisted of simple earthen ramparts reinforced with wooden palisades, but by the late 7th century, more elaborate defensive systems had emerged. The Gorodiще at Zimno, located on the Bug River, exemplifies this evolution with its complex system of multiple ramparts, ditches, and wooden gate structures that controlled access to the settlement's interior. The development of fortified settlements represented a crucial transition in Slavic society, reflecting both increased prosperity and growing security concerns. These Gorodiště served multiple functions beyond defence, acting as centres for craft production, trade, and political authority. Excavations at Kotomel have revealed evidence of specialised workshops for metalworking, pottery production, and textile manufacture, indicating the emergence of economic specialisation within Slavic communities. The internal organisation of Gorodiště followed consistent patterns across the Slavic expansion zone. The central area typically contained the largest and most elaborate structures, including communal buildings that may have served religious or administrative functions. Surrounding these central structures, residential areas were organised in irregular clusters, with evidence suggesting that related families occupied adjacent dwellings. Storage facilities, including large grain pits and elevated granaries, were positioned throughout the settlement, reflecting the agricultural basis of Slavic economy. The eastward movement of Slavic populations brought them into contact with diverse indigenous groups, leading to complex processes of cultural exchange and territorial organisation. In the forest zone north of the Pripyat marshes, Slavic settlers encountered Finno-Ugric peoples who possessed extensive knowledge of forest resources and river navigation. Archaeological evidence from sites like Gorodok suggests that initial contact between these groups was peaceful, with Slavic agricultural techniques complementing indigenous hunting and fishing practices. The emergence of distinct Eastern Slavic tribal confederations during the 7th and 8th centuries reflects the maturation of Slavic society and its adaptation to diverse environmental conditions across Eastern Europe. The Polans, whose name derives from the Slavic word for field dwellers, established themselves in the fertile lands around the middle Dnieper, centred on the emerging settlement of Kiev. Archaeological evidence from Palabian territory reveals extensive agricultural development, with field systems showing evidence of crop rotation and the cultivation of wheat, rye, millet, and barley. The Drevlians, or forest dwellers, occupied the heavily wooded regions west of the Dnieper, developing an economy that combined slash-and-burn agriculture with extensive exploitation of forest resources. Excavations at Drevlian sites reveal evidence of sophisticated woodworking traditions, including the construction of elaborate wooden fortifications and the production of wooden tools and implements. The abundance of iron slag at these sites indicates active metalworking, likely focused on producing agricultural tools and weapons needed for forest clearing and defence. North of Palabian territory, the Severians established control over the lands along the Desna and Seam rivers, developing agricultural practices adapted to the transitional forest steppe environment. Severian settlements show evidence of mixed farming strategies, combining grain cultivation with livestock raising and seasonal hunting. The material culture of Severian sites reflects this economic diversity, with archaeological assemblages containing both agricultural tools and hunting equipment, alongside evidence of trade connections extending south to the steppe regions. The Krivichs emerged as the dominant Slavic group in the northern regions, controlling territories around the headwaters of the Dnieper, Volga and western Dvina rivers. This strategic position placed them at the centre of emerging trade networks connecting the Baltic Sea with the interior river systems. Archaeological evidence from Krivich settlements reveals early adoption of long-distance trade practices, with finds including Baltic amber, iron ore from bog deposits, and luxury goods from distant regions. Krivich settlement patterns differed significantly from their southern counterparts, reflecting adaptation to the northern forest environment and the opportunities presented by river trade. Their Grodische were typically positioned at river confluences or portage points, maximising their control over transportation routes. The Gnezdovo complex, while showing later Scandinavian influence, began as a Krivich settlement exploiting the strategic position between the Dnieper and western Dvina river systems. The tribal confederations that emerged during this period were not rigid political entities, but rather loose associations of related communities sharing common cultural practices, dialects, and territorial interests. Leadership within these confederations appears to have been based on a combination of kinship ties, military prowess, and control over trade routes. Archaeological evidence suggests that political authority was exercised through a combination of consensus building and the personal charisma of individual leaders, rather than through formal institutional structures. The relationship between Slavic communities and the Khazar Khaganate represents one of the most significant aspects of early Rus's development. The Khazars, a Turkic people who had established a powerful state controlling the lower Volga and much of the Pontic steppe, maintained extensive trade networks connecting the Islamic world with northern Europe. Archaeological evidence from Khazar sites reveals a cosmopolitan urban culture with sophisticated administrative systems and diverse religious practices. Initial contact between Slavic communities and Khazar traders appears to have occurred during the late 7th century, as Slavic settlements expanded into the forest steppe regions that bordered Khazar territory. The Khazars' primary interest in these northern regions centred on accessing the valuable fur trade and establishing secure routes for the transportation of goods between the Islamic world and northern Europe. Slavic communities possessed both the forest resources and the river navigation knowledge that the Khazars needed to expand their commercial operations. The development of trade relationships between Slavic communities and the Khazar Khaganate facilitated significant cultural and technological exchange. Khazar merchants introduced Slavic traders to sophisticated commercial practices, including the use of standardized weights and measures, credit arrangements, and long-distance transportation techniques. Archaeological evidence from Slavic sites dating to this period shows the appearance of Khazar-style scales, weights, and other commercial equipment, indicating the adoption of Khazar trading practices. The flow of goods through these trading relationships transformed the material culture of Slavic communities. Luxury items from the Islamic world, including silk textiles, spices, and precious metals, began appearing in archaeological contexts at major Slavic settlements. The presence of Islamic silver dirhams in Slavic hoards dating to the 8th century provides concrete evidence of the volume and regularity of this trade. In exchange, Slavic communities provided furs, honey, wax, and slaves to Khazar merchants. who transported these goods south to Islamic markets. The influence of Khazar commercial practices extended beyond simple trade relationships to affect the internal organization of Slavic society. The need to organize and protect valuable trade goods led to the development of more sophisticated political structures within Slavic communities. Archaeological evidence suggests that certain settlements began specializing in trade-related activities, with evidence of large storage facilities, workshops for processing trade goods, and defensive arrangements designed to protect commercial assets. The Khazar tribute system also played a crucial role in shaping early Slavic political development. Several Slavic tribal confederations, particularly those in the forest steppe regions, came under Khazar suzerainty during the 8th century. This relationship involved the payment of tribute, typically in the form of furs or silver, in exchange for Khazar protection and access to their trade networks. Archaeological evidence from tribute-paying regions shows increased prosperity and the development of more elaborate material culture, suggesting that the benefits of Khazar association outweighed its costs. The cultural exchange facilitated by Khazar relationships extended beyond commercial practices to include technological innovations and artistic influences. Khazar metalworking techniques, particularly in silver and bronze, influenced Slavic craftsmen, leading to the development of new decorative styles and production methods. Archaeological finds from this period reveal the appearance of belt fittings, jewellery and other decorative items that combine Slavic motifs with Khazar technical traditions. The agricultural development of Slavic communities during the 7th and 8th centuries laid the foundation for their later political and military success. The fertile soils of the forest steppe region proved ideal for grain cultivation, allowing Slavic communities to generate substantial agricultural surpluses. Archaeological evidence from granary sites reveals storage capacities far exceeding immediate subsistence needs, indicating the development of surplus production for trade and population support. The expansion of agricultural production required significant technological innovations and social organization. Slavic communities developed improved ploughing techniques using iron-tipped wooden ploughs pulled by oxen, allowing for the cultivation of heavier soils that had previously been unsuitable for agriculture. The archaeological record shows a steady increase in the size and quality of iron agricultural tools throughout this period, reflecting both improved metallurgical techniques and increased agricultural specialization. The transformation of agricultural surplus production created conditions that would attract the attention of Scandinavian traders and warriors, whose arrival in Eastern Europe during the 8th century marked a decisive turning point in the development of what would become the Rus' state. The archaeological evidence for Scandinavian presence in Eastern Europe emerges suddenly and dramatically around 750 AD, concentrated initially at strategic river junctions and portage points along the established trade routes connecting the Baltic to the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world. The earliest definitive archaeological evidence of Scandinavian settlement appears at Staraya Ladoga, where excavations have revealed a distinct cultural layer dating to approximately 760 AD containing characteristically Scandinavian artifacts. The site's strategic position at the confluence of the Folkov River and Lake Ladoga provided ideal conditions for controlling river traffic between the Baltic Sea and the interior waterways. Swedish archaeologists working at the site have uncovered distinctive Scandinavian-style timber construction techniques, including the use of horizontal log walls with corner notching that differs markedly from contemporary Slavic building methods. The material culture at Staraya Ladoga reveals the presence of a mixed population from its earliest phases. Scandinavian oval brooches, distinctive sword types with pattern-welded blades, and Thor's hammer pendants appear alongside Slavic pottery and Finno-Ugric bone tools and ornaments. The workshop areas at the site show evidence of specialized craft production, including bead making using imported glass, metalworking facilities for processing both iron and non-ferrous metals, and boat-building areas where Scandinavian shipwrights constructed vessels adapted for river navigation. The cemetery at Staraya Ladoga provides crucial insights into the social organisation and cultural practices of the early Varangian settlers. Burial practices reveal a complex mixture of Scandinavian and local traditions, with some graves containing distinctively Scandinavian grave goods, including weapons, jewellery and gaming pieces, while others show evidence of local burial customs. The presence of chamber graves constructed using Scandinavian techniques but containing mixed artefact assemblages suggests rapid cultural adaptation and intermarriage between Scandinavian settlers and local populations. Runic inscriptions found at Staraya Ladoga and other early Scandinavian sites in Eastern Europe provide direct textual evidence of Norse presence and activities. The inscriptions, carved on wooden artefacts, bone implements and stone surfaces, typically contain personal names, ownership marks, and occasional longer texts describing trading activities or religious invocations. The runic alphabet used in these inscriptions corresponds to the younger Futhark system employed in 9th century Scandinavia, confirming the chronology suggested by archaeological dating methods. The expansion of Scandinavian presence from Staraya Ladoga followed the natural progression of the river trade route southward. Archaeological evidence from Gorodische, the settlement that preceded medieval Novgorod, revealed Scandinavian cultural material beginning in the late 8th century. The site's position at the northern end of Lake Ilmen made it a crucial control point for traders moving between the Volkhov river system and the portages leading to the Dnieper watershed. Excavations have uncovered evidence of substantial Scandinavian settlement, including distinctive house types, workshop areas, and burial grounds containing characteristically Norse grave goods. The Gnezdovo complex near Smolensk represents perhaps the most significant archaeological evidence for Varangian settlement and activity in Eastern Europe. The site's enormous cemetery, containing over 3,000 burial mounds, reveals the presence of a substantial and prosperous trading community that flourished from the late 9th through the 10th centuries. The burial practices at Gnezdovo demonstrate the complex cultural synthesis that characterized Varangian settlements, with Scandinavian cremation rituals adapted to local conditions and combined with Slavic and Finno-Ugric burial traditions. The grave goods from Gnezdovo burials provide extraordinary insight into the material wealth and cultural connections of the Varangian trading communities. Weapons found in the burials include pattern-welded swords of Frankish manufacture, Scandinavian-style axes and spearheads, and archery equipment reflecting both Norse and nomadic steppe traditions. The presence of Islamic silver coins, Byzantine jewellery, and Western European glass beads demonstrates the extensive trade networks controlled by the Gnezdovo community. The establishment of Varangian trading posts followed strategic considerations based on river geography and existing settlement patterns. The most successful Varangian settlements were positioned at natural bottlenecks in the river systems, where geography forced all traffic to pass through specific points. The Dnieper Rapids south of Kiev created one such choke point, where Varangian traders established seasonal camps to assist merchant expeditions in navigating the treacherous waters. Archaeological evidence from these sites reveals temporary structures designed for processing and protecting trade goods during the dangerous passage. The fortified nature of Varangian settlements reflects both their wealth and their vulnerable position as foreign minorities controlling valuable trade routes. The defensive arrangements at sites like Gnezdovo included substantial earthen ramparts reinforced with timber palisades and stone foundations. The gates and towers controlling access to these settlements show sophisticated construction techniques, with evidence of specialized military architecture designed to withstand siege warfare. The presence of weapon caches and the construction of hidden storage facilities within the fortifications indicate the constant threat of attack faced by these communities. The integration of Varangian settlers with established Slavic populations proceeded through multiple mechanisms ranging from peaceful commercial relationships to violent conquest and subjugation. Archaeological evidence suggests that the initial phase of Varangian settlement was primarily commercial in nature, with Scandinavian traders establishing themselves as intermediaries in existing trade networks rather than attempting to displace local populations. The material culture from early Varangian sites shows extensive borrowing from local traditions, particularly in pottery production, agricultural tools, and domestic architecture. The linguistic evidence for Varangian Slavic integration appears in the adoption of Scandinavian loanwords into early Slavic dialects, particularly terms related to trade, navigation, and military organisation. Archaeological correlates for this linguistic exchange include the appearance of Scandinavian-style scales and weights at Slavic settlements, the adoption of Norse boat-building techniques by Slavic craftsmen, and the integration of Scandinavian decorative motifs into local artistic traditions. Intermarriage between Varangian settlers and local women played a crucial role in the integration process, as evidenced by burial practices that combine elements from multiple cultural traditions. The cemetery evidence from mixed communities shows the gradual development of hybrid burial customs that incorporated Scandinavian grave goods with Slavic and Finno-Ugric ritual practices. The presence of children's graves containing mixed artifact assemblages suggests that the second generation of Varangian settlers developed cultural identities that blended elements from their Scandinavian heritage with local traditions. The conflict between Varangian newcomers and established populations is archaeologically visible at several sites where destruction layers coincide with changes in material culture and settlement patterns. The fortified Slavic settlement at Tsarskoye Gorodishche shows evidence of violent destruction in the late 8th century, followed by reconstruction using Scandinavian building techniques and the appearance of Norse material culture. Similar patterns of destruction and cultural replacement appear at other sites along the Volga trade route, suggesting systematic Varangian conquest of strategic positions. The military organisation of Varangian forces reflected their origins as warrior merchants operating in hostile territory far from their Scandinavian homelands. Archaeological evidence from weapon deposits and grave goods reveals a military culture based on individual combat prowess and the possession of high-quality weapons and armour. The typical Varangian warrior carried a pattern-welded sword, often of Frankish manufacture, along with a broad-bladed axe, spears and archery equipment. The presence of mail armour and metal helmets in wealthy graves indicates the substantial investment required to equip professional warriors. The tactical advantages possessed by Varangian military forces included superior weapons technology, professional training, and mobility provided by their mastery of river navigation. The Scandinavian tradition of combining seafaring with warfare translated effectively to the river systems of Eastern Europe, where Varangian forces could move rapidly between widely separated targets while maintaining secure supply lines through their control of waterborne transportation. The archaeological record shows evidence of Varangian military camps positioned at strategic river junctions, designed to control both land and water routes. The role of Varangian warriors as mercenaries in the service of established Slavic rulers appears in the archaeological record through the presence of Scandinavian weapons and burial practices at major Slavic political centres. The employment of Varangian military specialists by Slavic princes provided both groups with mutual benefits. The Slavs gained access to superior military technology and professional warriors, while the Varangians secured political protection and commercial privileges. This relationship is archaeologically visible in the presence of mixed cultural assemblages at elite burial sites and the construction of fortifications using both Scandinavian and Slavic techniques. The transformation of Varangian military leaders into territorial rulers represents a crucial development in the formation of early Russia's political structures. Archaeological evidence from sites like Rurikovo Gorodishche near Novgorod reveals the gradual evolution of Varangian trading posts into permanent political centres. the construction of elaborate residential complexes, the establishment of craft workshops under princely control, and the development of administrative buildings indicate the transition from commercial to political authority. The administrative capabilities that Varangian rulers brought to their territories included sophisticated record-keeping systems, standardized weights and measures, and established diplomatic protocols for dealing with foreign powers. Archaeological evidence for these administrative innovations includes the appearance of lead seals used for authenticating documents, standardized silver ingots used as currency, and the construction of specialized buildings for conducting official business. The adoption of these Scandinavian administrative practices by Slavic communities facilitated the development of more complex political organizations. The relationship between Varangian rulers and the tribute-paying populations under their control is archaeologically visible through changes in settlement patterns and material culture distribution. The establishment of Varangian political authority led to the concentration of wealth and craft production at major political centres, while rural settlements show evidence of increased agricultural production to support tribute obligations. The archaeological record reveals the development of specialised craft workshops producing goods specifically for tribute payment, including standardised fur processing facilities and workshops for producing luxury items demanded by foreign trading partners. The proto-state formations that emerged under Varangian leadership combined Scandinavian military and commercial expertise with Slavic agricultural production and local knowledge of river navigation. These political entities were characterized by their control over strategic river junctions, their ability to organize long-distance trading expeditions, and their capacity to extract tribute from surrounding agricultural populations. The archaeological evidence for these early states includes the construction of major fortified centres, the establishment of satellite settlements to control territory, and the development of specialised economic activities to support state functions. The military retinues that formed the core of Varangian political power consisted of professional warriors bound to their leaders through personal loyalty and the expectation of sharing in the profits of trading and raiding expeditions. Archaeological evidence from elite burial sites reveals the material culture of these warrior bands, including high-quality weapons, imported luxury goods, and personal ornaments that demonstrated their status and wealth. The burial practices associated with these retinues show the maintenance of Scandinavian traditions, even as the warriors became integrated into local political structures. The territorial expansion of Varangian-led political formations followed the logic of river-based transportation and trade route control. Archaeological evidence shows the systematic establishment of fortified positions at key points along major waterways, with each position designed to control river traffic and extract tribute from passing merchants. The spacing and positioning of these fortifications reveal sophisticated strategic planning based on detailed knowledge of river geography and seasonal navigation patterns. The economic foundation of Varangian political power rested on their control of long-distance trade routes and their ability to organize large-scale commercial expeditions. Archaeological evidence from major Varangian centres reveals the infrastructure necessary to support these trading operations, including large warehouse facilities, workshops for processing trade goods, and shipbuilding areas for constructing and maintaining river vessels. The scale of these facilities indicates commercial operations far exceeding the needs of local consumption, confirming the international scope of Varangian trading activities. The consolidation of Varangian commercial and military power throughout the river systems of Eastern Europe created the preconditions for the political transformation that would define the emergence of the Rus's state. By the middle of the 9th century, the accumulated wealth from decades of successful trading operations had enabled Varangian leaders to maintain substantial military retinues and establish permanent territorial control over key strategic positions. The archaeological evidence from this period reveals a dramatic shift in settlement patterns, with the construction of larger fortified centres and the development of hierarchical relationships between major strongholds and their dependent territories. The primary chronicle's account of the invitation extended to Rurik and his brothers represents one of the most debated narratives in early Rus's historiography. According to the chronicler's version, the Slavic and Finno-Ugric tribes of the northern regions, specifically the Chud, Slavs, Krivichs and Ves, expelled Varangian tribute collectors around 862 AD, but subsequently found themselves unable to maintain order without external authority. The chronicle states that these tribes then sent envoys across the Baltic with the famous invitation, "Our land is great and rich, but there is no order in it. Come and rule over us." The historical accuracy of this narrative has been extensively questioned by modern scholars, who note the chronicle's composition several centuries after the alleged events, and its obvious ideological purpose in legitimizing Rurikid dynastic claims. Archaeological evidence from the relevant period shows no clear destruction layers that would correspond to the expulsion of Varangian forces, nor is there evidence of the political chaos that the chronicle describes. Instead, the material record suggests a continuity of Varangian presence and gradual consolidation of their authority, rather than dramatic rupture and restoration. The legendary elements of the invitation story become apparent when compared with similar foundation narratives from other medieval societies. The theme of foreign rulers being invited to restore order appears in numerous Germanic and Celtic traditions, suggesting that the primary chronicle's account may have been influenced by literary conventions rather than historical memory. The specific details of the story, the threefold division of authority among the brothers, their establishment in different cities, and the subsequent unification under Rurik, follow patterns common to medieval dynastic legends designed to explain complex political developments through simplified narratives. Archaeological investigation of the sites associated with Rurik's alleged brothers provides little support for the chronicle's account. Beluzero, where Cineas supposedly established his authority, shows no evidence of major political developments during the 860s that would correspond to the arrival of a new ruler. Similarly, Izborsk, the alleged seat of Truvor, reveals continuous development throughout the 9th century without the dramatic changes that might be expected from the establishment of new political authority. The absence of distinctive Scandinavian material culture at these sites during the relevant period suggests that if Varangian rulers did establish themselves there, their presence was either minimal or indistinguishable from existing Scandinavian populations. The figure of Rurik himself presents particular historical challenges, as the primary chronicle provides virtually no details about his background, activities, or achievements beyond the basic framework of his invitation and establishment in Novgorod. Some historians have attempted to identify him with Rorik of Dorestad, a Danish Viking leader active in Frisia during the mid-9th century, but this identification remains speculative and is not supported by definitive evidence. The archaeological record from Rurikovo Gorodishche, the settlement near Novgorod that bears his name, reveals continuous Scandinavian presence from the early 9th century, but provides no clear evidence for a specific ruler or dramatic political transition in the 860s. The establishment of Rurik's rule in Novgorod, as described in the primary chronicle, represents the formalization of Varangian political authority that had been developing gradually throughout the first half of the 9th century. Archaeological evidence from Rurikovo Gorodishche reveals substantial construction activity during this period, including the expansion of defensive fortifications and the construction of large residential complexes that suggest the presence of a significant ruling elite. The site's strategic position at the northern end of Lake Ilmen provided control over the crucial water routes connecting the Baltic trade networks with the interior river systems. The material culture from Rurikovo Gorodishche during the mid-9th century demonstrates the cosmopolitan nature of the emerging Rus's political centre. Excavations have uncovered artefacts from across the known world, including Islamic silver coins, Byzantine silk textiles, Frankish weapons, and amber from the Baltic shores. The presence of specialized workshops for metalworking, bead production, and textile manufacture indicates the concentration of skilled craftsmen under princely patronage. The scale and sophistication of these workshop operations suggest production levels far exceeding local consumption, confirming the site's role as a major centre for long-distance trade. The founding of the Rurikid dynasty, whether historical or legendary, established the political framework that would govern the Rus's territories for the next 7 centuries. The dynastic principle introduced by the Varangian rulers differed significantly from the tribal leadership structures that had previously characterized Slavic political organization. Instead of authority based on kinship ties within local communities or temporary military leadership, the Rurikid system established hereditary rule transmitted through patrilineal descent. This innovation provided political stability and continuity that enabled the development of more complex state structures. Archaeological evidence for the implementation of dynastic authority appears in the construction of permanent royal residences and the establishment of administrative centres throughout Varangian-controlled territories. The fortified complexes at major centres like Gniezdovo, Sarsko-Gorodishche and Shestovice reveal architectural features designed to house ruling elites and their retinues on a permanent basis. These structures included large halls for ceremonial gatherings, private residential quarters for the ruling family, and storage facilities for tribute collection and redistribution. The administrative innovations introduced by the Rurikid dynasty drew upon Scandinavian traditions of royal governance while adapting to the specific conditions of Eastern European river-based territories. The archaeological record reveals the development of standardized weights and measures, the establishment of regular tribute collection systems, and the creation of permanent military garrisons at strategic locations. Lead seals bearing runic inscriptions provide evidence for the development of documentary administration, while the distribution of standardized silver ingots suggests the implementation of regular taxation and payment systems. Archaeological evidence supporting the emergence of centralized authority in key trading settlements becomes particularly visible during the second half of the 9th century. The construction of monumental earthwork fortifications at sites like Gniezdovo required the coordination of substantial labour forces and the investment of significant resources in non-productive activities. The scale of these undertakings indicates the presence of political authorities capable of organising large-scale public works projects and commanding the loyalty or obedience of substantial populations. The cemetery evidence from major trading centres reveals the emergence of distinct social hierarchies that correspond to the development of centralised political authority. The burial practices at Gniezdovo show clear differentiation between elite graves containing elaborate weapon sets, imported luxury goods, and evidence of human sacrifice, and simpler burials reflecting the material culture of dependent populations. The most elaborate burials include chamber graves constructed using Scandinavian techniques, but containing artifact assemblages that reflect the cosmopolitan nature of Russia's elite culture. The distribution of Islamic silver coins throughout the territories under Rurikid control provides quantitative evidence for the expansion and intensification of centralized authority. Hoards dating to the late 9th century show dramatic increases in the volume of silver circulating through the region, indicating the success of the new political structures in organising and protecting long-distance trade. The standardization of coin weights and the evidence for systematic clipping and testing of silver quality suggest the development of sophisticated monetary systems under princely control. The fortification systems that emerged during this period reveal the military capabilities that supported centralized authority. The defensive arrangements at Rurikovo-Gorodishche included multiple lines of earthen ramparts reinforced with timber palisades and stone foundations. The gates controlling access to the settlement featured complex entrance systems designed to channel attackers through killing zones while providing defenders with protected firing positions. The construction techniques employed in these fortifications demonstrate knowledge of advanced military engineering principles derived from both Scandinavian and Byzantine traditions. The synthesis of Scandinavian military organisation with Slavic administrative traditions created distinctive institutional forms that characterised early Rus's governance. The Varangian tradition of warrior bands bound to their leaders through personal loyalty was adapted to incorporate Slavic concepts of territorial authority and tribute collection from agricultural populations. Archaeological evidence for this synthesis appears in the construction of fortified administrative centres that combined military functions with civilian governance, storage facilities for tribute collection, and workshops for producing goods needed for state functions. The military retinues that formed the core of Rurikid power retained their Scandinavian character, while gradually incorporating local elements. Weapon deposits from this period reveal the continued importance of high-quality Scandinavian and Frankish swords, but also show the adoption of archery equipment and cavalry techniques derived from contact with nomadic steppe peoples. The burial practices of elite warriors demonstrate the maintenance of Norse traditions, including ship burials and the deposition of complete weapon sets, while also incorporating local customs such as the inclusion of Slavic pottery and ornaments. The administrative traditions that developed under early Rurikid rule combined Scandinavian practices of personal loyalty and gift exchange with Slavic systems of territorial governance and tribute collection. The archaeological evidence reveals the establishment of permanent administrative centres at strategic locations throughout the controlled territories, each equipped with storage facilities, workshops and residential quarters for appointed officials. The standardisation of administrative practices across these centres indicates the development of systematic governance procedures that transcended local traditions and customs. Emerging diplomatic practices reflected the international scope of Rurikid political ambitions and the cosmopolitan nature of their territories. Archaeological evidence from major centres reveals the presence of foreign merchants, diplomats and craftsmen from across the known world. The construction of specialised quarters for foreign residents, the establishment of interpreters and guides familiar with multiple languages, and the development of protocols for receiving foreign embassies indicate the sophistication of early Russ's diplomatic capabilities. The tribute systems that supported Rurikid authority drew upon both Scandinavian traditions of wealth redistribution among warrior bands and Slavic practices of agricultural surplus extraction. Archaeological evidence reveals the development of standardised tribute assessment procedures with evidence for systematic measurement of agricultural production and the establishment of regular collection schedules. The storage facilities at major centres were designed to accommodate large quantities of diverse tribute goods, including furs, honey, wax, grain and craft products. The territorial organisation that emerged under Rurikid rule reflected the geographic realities of river-based transportation and the strategic requirements of controlling long-distance trade routes. The placement of administrative centres followed the natural progression of major waterways, with each centre positioned to control river traffic and coordinate with neighbouring installations. The archaeological evidence reveals a hierarchical system of settlements, with major centres exercising authority over networks of smaller fortified positions and unfortified agricultural communities. The integration of diverse populations under Rurikid authority required the development of flexible governance systems that could accommodate different cultural traditions while maintaining political unity. Archaeological evidence from territories with mixed populations reveals the continuation of local burial practices, pottery traditions, and domestic architecture, alongside the adoption of standardised administrative procedures and tribute obligations. This pattern suggests a pragmatic approach to governance that prioritised political control and economic extraction over cultural uniformity. The economic foundations of Rurikid power extended beyond simple tribute collection to include direct involvement in craft production and trade organisation. Archaeological evidence from major centres reveals the establishment of workshops producing goods specifically for long-distance trade, including standardised fur processing facilities, metalworking shops producing weapons and tools for export, and textile workshops creating products for foreign markets. The scale and sophistication of these operations indicates state-sponsored economic activities designed to maximise the profits from international trade. The military innovations that supported Rurikid expansion included the development of river-based warfare techniques that combined Scandinavian naval traditions with local knowledge of waterway navigation. Archaeological evidence reveals the construction of specialised military vessels designed for river warfare, including ships equipped with ramming prows and platforms for archery combat. The establishment of naval bases at strategic river junctions provided the infrastructure necessary for projecting military power throughout the extensive river networks of Eastern Europe. The death of Rurik around 879 AD precipitated a succession crisis that would ultimately reshape the political landscape of Eastern Europe and establish the foundations for the unified Rus' state. With Rurik's son Igor still a minor, authority passed to Oleg, identified in the primary chronicle as Rurik's kinsman and military commander. Archaeological evidence from Rurikovo Gorodische reveals significant construction activity during this transition period, including the expansion of defensive fortifications and the establishment of new administrative buildings that suggest preparations for major political and military undertakings. Oleg's assumption of regency marked a decisive shift from the relatively localized authority exercised by earlier Varangian rulers to a systematic program of territorial expansion and political consolidation. The archaeological record from sites throughout the northern river systems shows evidence of increased military activity during the early 880s, including the construction of fortified positions at strategic river junctions and the establishment of supply depots designed to support extended military campaigns. The scale of these preparations indicates planning for operations far more ambitious than the localized conflicts that had characterized earlier Varangian expansion. The strategic vision that drove Oleg's southern expansion reflected a sophisticated understanding of the economic and political opportunities presented by control over the entire route from the Varangians to the Greeks. Archaeological evidence from trading centres along this route reveals the enormous wealth generated by commerce between the Baltic region and the Byzantine Empire, with Islamic silver, Byzantine luxury goods, and northern furs flowing through established networks that connected Scandinavia to Constantinople and the Islamic world. The concentration of this wealth at key river junctions made control over these positions enormously valuable to any ruler capable of seizing and maintaining them. The military preparations for Oleg's southern campaign involved the mobilization of forces from across the northern Rus' territories. Archaeological evidence from weapon deposits and burial sites dating to this period reveals the assembly of substantial military forces equipped with standardized weapons and armor. The grave goods from elite warrior burials show the presence of professional military specialists, armed with pattern-welded swords, broad-bladed axes, and mail armor that represented significant investments in military equipment. The standardization of weapon types and the evidence for centralized production of military equipment indicate systematic preparation for large-scale warfare. The expedition that culminated in the conquest of Kiev began with the systematic reduction of fortified positions along the Dnieper route. Archaeological evidence from sites like Gnezdovo reveals signs of military activity during the early 880s. Including destruction layers that correspond to the period of Oleg's southern advance. The reconstruction of these sites following their capture shows the implementation of standardized fortification designs and administrative arrangements that reflect centralized political control rather than local autonomy. The approach to Kiev required careful coordination of both land and river-based forces, as the city's position on the high western bank of the Dnieper provided natural defensive advantages that could not be overcome through simple assault. Archaeological investigation of the approaches to Kiev reveals evidence of temporary military camps positioned to control river traffic while maintaining secure supply lines to the north. The placement of these camps demonstrates sophisticated military planning that took into account both the seasonal variations in river levels and the defensive capabilities of the target city. The Primary Chronicles account of Oleg's deception in capturing Kiev describes how he concealed his warriors in boats and presented himself as a peaceful merchant before revealing his true identity and overwhelming the city's defenders. While the specific details of this narrative may reflect literary embellishment, archaeological evidence supports the general picture of a carefully planned operation that achieves surprise through the use of disguised forces. The absence of extensive destruction layers at Kiev suggests that the city's capture was accomplished through stratagem rather than prolonged siege warfare. The elimination of Askold and Dir, the Varangian rulers who had controlled Kiev since the 860s, represented more than simple political assassination, but rather the systematic removal of rivals to Rurikid authority. Archaeological evidence from elite burial sites in the Kiev region shows a marked change in burial practices following Oleg's conquest, with the disappearance of certain types of Scandinavian grave goods and their replacement by artifact assemblages that reflect the material culture of the northern Russia's territories. This pattern suggests a comprehensive replacement of the existing political elite rather than simple incorporation into Oleg's power structure. The establishment of Kiev as Oleg's primary residence and the administrative centre of the expanded Rus' state required substantial modifications to the city's infrastructure and defensive arrangements. Archaeological excavations in the historical centre of Kiev reveal extensive construction activity dating to the late 9th century, including the expansion of fortifications, the construction of large residential complexes for the ruling elite, and the establishment of workshop areas for craft production under princely control. The scale of these undertakings indicates the commitment of substantial resources to transforming Kiev into a capital worthy of a major territorial power. The strategic importance of controlling both Novgorod and Kiev lay in their positions at opposite ends of the most lucrative trade route in Eastern Europe. Archaeological evidence from both cities reveals the enormous wealth that flowed through this commercial network, with finds including Islamic silver coins, Byzantine silk textiles, precious stones from Central Asia, and amber from the Baltic shores. The volume of luxury goods present at these sites far exceeds what could be supported by local production, confirming their roles as major international trading centres whose control provided access to unprecedented wealth. The military campaigns that followed the conquest of Kiev were designed to establish tributary relationships with the various Slavic tribes whose territories flanked the Dnieper trade route. Archaeological evidence from tribal territories shows signs of military pressure during this period, including the construction of new fortifications and the presence of weapon deposits that suggest preparation for conflict. The material culture from these sites reveals the gradual adoption of Rus' administrative practices and the appearance of goods that indicate participation in the expanded trade networks controlled by Oleg's forces. The subjugation of the Drevlians required sustained military pressure against a population whose forest territories provided natural defensive advantages. Archaeological evidence from Drevlian settlements reveals signs of systematic destruction followed by reconstruction under Rus' supervision. The establishment of fortified administrative centres in Drevlian territory provided bases for tribute collection and the suppression of resistance movements. The tribute obligations imposed on the Drevlians included furs, honey and wax, products that were essential components of the international trade networks that formed the economic foundation of Rus' power. The incorporation of the Severians into Oleg's tributary system required different tactics, as their territories along the Desna and Siem rivers provided alternative routes that could be used to bypass Rus' control over the main Dnieper route. Archaeological evidence from Severian settlements shows the establishment of Rus's administrative presence at key river junctions, with fortified positions designed to monitor and control river traffic. The tribute arrangements with the Severians included both traditional forest products and agricultural surplus, reflecting the mixed economy of the forest-steppe region they inhabited. The campaign against the Radomys demonstrated Oleg's systematic approach to eliminating alternative sources of political authority that might challenge Rus's control over tributary populations. The Radomys had previously paid tribute to the Khazars, and their incorporation into the Rus's system required the displacement of Khazar influence from territories that had been under their control for several generations. Archaeological evidence from Radomys territory reveals the destruction of Khazar-affiliated trading posts and their replacement by fortifications built using Rus's construction techniques. The confrontation with Khazar authority represented a major escalation in the scope of Oleg's territorial ambitions, as the Khazar Khaganate remained a formidable military and political power with extensive resources and established diplomatic relationships throughout the region. Archaeological evidence from the border regions between Rus and Khazar territories reveals the construction of substantial fortifications designed to withstand attacks by nomadic cavalry forces. The defensive arrangements at these sites include features specifically adapted to counter-steppe warfare tactics, including multiple lines of earthen ramparts and obstacles designed to disrupt cavalry charges. The tribute systems established by Oleg throughout the conquered territories represented a sophisticated administrative achievement that required the coordination of collection procedures across vast distances and diverse populations. Archaeological evidence reveals the standardization of tribute assessment methods, with uniform procedures for measuring and evaluating different types of goods. The establishment of regular collection schedules and the construction of storage facilities at strategic locations provided the infrastructure necessary for systematic extraction and transportation of tribute goods to major trading centres. The administrative innovations implemented during Oleg's reign included the appointment of governors to oversee tributary territories and the establishment of permanent garrisons to enforce compliance with tribute obligations. Archaeological evidence from administrative centres reveals the construction of specialised buildings for housing appointed officials and their retinues, along with facilities for storing and processing tribute goods. The standardisation of administrative practices across these centres indicates the development of systematic governance procedures that could be implemented consistently throughout the expanded Rus' territories. The military organisation that supported Oleg's conquests combined the traditional Varangian warrior band structure with innovations adapted to the requirements of territorial control and administration. Archaeological evidence from military sites reveals the presence of professional warrior units equipped with standardised weapons and supported by logistical systems capable of maintaining forces in the field for extended periods. The burial practices of elite warriors show the continued importance of personal loyalty to military leaders, while also reflecting the development of more formal military hierarchies. The economic integration of the conquered territories into the Rus' trade network required substantial investments in transportation infrastructure and commercial facilities. Archaeological evidence reveals the construction of the improved portage routes between river systems, the establishment of warehouse facilities at major trading centres, and the development of standardised weights and measures that facilitated commercial transactions. The scale of these undertakings indicates state-sponsored economic development designed to maximise the profits from expanded territorial control. The expedition against Constantinople in 907 AD represented the culmination of Oleg's territorial expansion and the demonstration of Rus's emergence as a major regional power capable of threatening the Byzantine Empire itself. Archaeological evidence from sites along the Dnieper route reveals extensive preparations for this campaign, including the construction of naval bases and the assembly of materials for building the fleet that would transport Rus's forces to the walls of Constantinople. The scale of these preparations indicates a massive undertaking that involved the mobilization of resources from throughout the Rus' territories. The logistics of transporting a substantial military force from Kiev to Constantinople required careful coordination of both river and maritime navigation, as the expedition had to traverse the Dnieper Rapids, cross the Black Sea, and approach the heavily fortified Byzantine capital. Archaeological evidence from temporary camps along the route reveals the infrastructure necessary to support such an undertaking, including facilities for repairing and maintaining vessels, supply depots for storing provisions, and defensive positions to protect the expedition from attacks by hostile populations along the route. The siege of Constantinople demonstrated Rus' adoption of advanced military techniques that went far beyond traditional Varangian raiding tactics. The primary chronicle's description of Oleg's forces placing their ships on wheels and sailing across land to bypass the chain blocking the Golden Horn, while possibly embellished, reflects the innovative approaches employed by Rus' military engineers. Archaeological evidence from Byzantine sources confirms that the 907 expedition posed a serious threat to the capital and forced the imperial government to negotiate rather than risk a prolonged siege. The peace treaty negotiated between Oleg and the Byzantine Emperor Leo VI established the framework for regular commercial and diplomatic relationships between the Rus and the Byzantine Empire. Archaeological evidence from trading centres along the Dnieper route shows dramatic increases in the volume of Byzantine goods following the conclusion of this agreement, indicating the success of Oleg's military pressure in opening new commercial opportunities. The treaty provisions included guarantees of safe passage for Rus' merchants, standardised procedures for commercial transactions, and diplomatic protocols for resolving disputes. The 911 AD trade agreement that formalised the commercial relationship between the Rus and Byzantium represents one of the earliest documented international treaties involving the Rus state. Archaeological evidence from Constantinople reveals the presence of a permanent Rus merchant quarter, with facilities for housing visiting traders and storing their goods. The scale of these facilities indicates substantial and regular commercial activity that justified significant investment in permanent infrastructure. The legal and administrative frameworks that emerged during Oleg's reign reflected the synthesis of Varangian, Slavic, and Byzantine influences that characterized early Rus' institutional development. Archaeological evidence reveals the adoption of Byzantine administrative practices, including the use of lead seals for authenticating documents and the establishment of standardized legal procedures for resolving commercial disputes. The influence of Slavic customary law appears in the continued importance of kinship ties and collective responsibility in legal proceedings, while Varangian traditions contributed concepts of personal loyalty and military service obligations. The death of Oleg in 912 AD marked the end of the Great Expansion phase that had unified the northern and southern Rus' territories under a single political authority. Archaeological evidence from Kiev reveals elaborate burial preparations during this period, including the construction of substantial funeral monuments that reflect the accumulated wealth and prestige of the Rus' state under Oleg's leadership. The transition of power to Igor, Rurik's son who had finally reached maturity, represented both continuity with the established Rurikid dynasty and the beginning of new challenges that would test the administrative and military structures created during the previous generation. Igor's assumption of full ruling authority coincided with the emergence of complex problems that stemmed directly from the success of Oleg's conquests. The vast territorial expanse now under Rus' control stretched from the Baltic shores to the Black Sea steppes, encompassing diverse populations with different languages, customs, and economic systems. Archaeological evidence from administrative centres throughout this territory reveals the strain placed on existing governance structures by the sheer scale of the territories requiring supervision and coordination. the standardized administrative procedures that had worked effectively during the conquest phase proved inadequate for the long-term management of such extensive and diverse holdings. The challenge of maintaining control over tributary populations became particularly acute as the initial shock of conquest faded and local populations began to reassess their relationships with their Rus's overlords. Archaeological evidence from tribal territories reveals increasing signs of fortification construction and weapon accumulation during the early years of Igor's reign, suggesting growing resistance to continued tribute obligations. The material culture from these sites shows attempts to reduce dependence on Rus-controlled trade networks through the development of alternative commercial relationships and local craft production. The Drevlian territories presented the most persistent challenge to Igor's authority, as their forest environment provided natural defensive advantages, while their traditional economy based on hunting, beekeeping and limited agriculture generated surplus products that were essential to Rus's trade networks. Archaeological excavations at Drevlian settlements reveal evidence of systematic efforts to evade tribute obligations, including the concealment of valuable goods in hidden storage pits and the development of alternative trading relationships that bypassed Rus's commercial networks. The discovery of weapon caches at multiple Drevlian sites indicates preparation for armed resistance to continued tributary status. The economic pressures that drove Igor's increasingly aggressive tribute collection policies stemmed from the enormous costs of maintaining the military and administrative apparatus necessary to control the expanded Rus territories. Archaeological evidence from major centres reveals the substantial resources required to support professional military units, maintain fortifications, and fund the diplomatic and commercial activities that sustained relationships with Byzantium and other foreign powers. The scale of these expenditures created constant pressure for increased revenue extraction from tributary populations. The military organisation that Igor inherited from Oleg required continuous financing to maintain its effectiveness, as professional warriors expected regular payment in the form of silver, luxury goods, and opportunities for profitable military expeditions. Archaeological evidence from warrior burial sites during this period reveals the continued importance of high-quality weapons and imported luxury goods in maintaining the loyalty of military elites. The expense of equipping and maintaining these forces created an ongoing need for tribute revenue that often exceeded the productive capacity of tributary populations. The administrative burden of governing diverse populations across vast distances required the development of more sophisticated bureaucratic structures than had been necessary during the conquest phase. Archaeological evidence reveals the expansion of administrative facilities at major centres, including the construction of specialised buildings for record-keeping, the establishment of permanent quarters for appointed officials, and the development of communication systems for coordinating activities across the territory. The costs associated with these administrative innovations added to the financial pressures that drove increasingly intensive tribute collection. The relationship between the Rus' state and the Byzantine Empire during Igor's reign reflected both the commercial opportunity created by Oleg's military successes and the ongoing tensions that resulted from competing interests in the Black Sea region. Archaeological evidence from trading centres along the Dnieper route reveals continued growth in commercial activity with Byzantium, but also shows signs of periodic disruptions that suggest diplomatic and military conflicts. The material culture from this period includes both Byzantine luxury goods that indicate successful trade relationships and weapon deposits that suggest preparation for military confrontations. The naval expeditions that Igor launched against Byzantine territories represented attempts to maintain the military pressure that had proven effective during Oleg's reign, while also providing opportunities for his warriors to acquire wealth through raiding activities. Archaeological evidence from coastal sites in the Black Sea region reveals the impact of these expeditions, including destruction layers at Byzantine settlements and the presence of Rus's military equipment at sites along the traditional raiding routes. The scale of these operations required substantial logistical preparation, including the construction of naval bases and the assembly of materials for building and maintaining large fleets. The 941 AD expedition against Constantinople demonstrated both the continued military capabilities of the Rus' state and the limitations of relying primarily on raiding for revenue generation. Archaeological evidence from preparation sites along the Dnieper reveals the massive scale of this undertaking, with facilities for assembling and equipping a fleet that contemporary sources describe as consisting of over 1,000 vessels. The logistical requirements for such an expedition included not only the construction and provisioning of ships, but also the coordination of forces from throughout the Rus' territories. The Byzantine response to Igor's 941 expedition revealed the empire's development of effective countermeasures against Rus naval attacks, including the use of Greek fire and improved naval tactics that neutralized many of the advantages that had contributed to earlier Rus' successes. Archaeological evidence from Byzantine coastal fortifications shows substantial improvements in defensive arrangements during this period, including the construction of specialized facilities for deploying incendiary weapons against attacking fleets. The failure of Igor's expedition demonstrated the need for more sophisticated military planning and the limitations of traditional raiding tactics against well-prepared defenders. The 944 AD campaign that resulted in a renewed treaty with Byzantium reflected Igor's adaptation to the changed strategic situation in the Black Sea region. Archaeological evidence suggests that this expedition was planned more carefully than its predecessor, with better intelligence gathering and more realistic assessment of Byzantine defensive capabilities. The successful negotiation of favourable commercial terms demonstrated that diplomatic pressure backed by credible military threat could achieve results that pure military action had failed to accomplish. The treaty provisions negotiated in 944 AD expanded Rus' commercial privileges within the Byzantine Empire, while also establishing more detailed procedures for resolving disputes and preventing conflicts. Archaeological evidence from the Rus merchant quarter in Constantinople reveals substantial expansion of facilities during this period, indicating increased commercial activity following the successful negotiations. The standardization of weights, measures and commercial procedures facilitated more extensive trade relationships while reducing the transaction costs that had previously limited commercial expansion. The internal administrative challenges that accumulated during Igor's reign reflected the fundamental tension between the military culture of the ruling Varangian elite and the requirements of territorial governance over sedentary agricultural populations. Archaeological evidence from administrative centres reveals attempts to systematize tribute collection procedures through the establishment of standardized assessment methods and regular collection schedules. However, the implementation of these systems often conflicted with local customs and seasonal agricultural cycles, creating friction between Rus' administrators and tributary populations. The tribute collection system that developed during Igor's reign involved the annual circuit known as Polyudia, during which the prince and his retinue would travel throughout the tributary territories to collect payments in kind and adjudicate disputes. Archaeological evidence from sites along these collection routes reveals the substantial logistical infrastructure required to support these expeditions, including seasonal camps, storage facilities, and defensive positions. The material culture from these sites shows the enormous quantities of goods collected through this system, including furs, honey, wax, grain, and craft products that form the basis of Rus' international trade. The increasing burden of tribute obligations created growing resentment among tributary populations, particularly as the initial justification of protection from external enemies became less relevant with the establishment of secure borders. Archaeological evidence from tribal territories reveals signs of economic strain, including the abandonment of marginal agricultural areas and the concentration of population in more defensible locations. The material culture from this period shows attempts to reduce tribute burdens through the concealment of valuable goods and the development of alternative economic activities that were less visible to Rus's tax collectors. The Drevlian revolt that culminated in Igor's death in 945 AD represented the most serious challenge to Rus authority since the initial conquest period. Archaeological evidence from Drevlian territories reveals extensive preparations for armed resistance, including the construction of new fortifications, the accumulation of weapons, and the establishment of alternative trade networks that reduced dependence on Rus-controlled commerce. The scale of these preparations indicates that the revolt was not a spontaneous uprising, but rather a carefully planned resistance movement that had been developing over several years. The immediate cause of the Drevlian revolt appears to have been Igor's attempt to collect tribute twice in a single year, a violation of established custom that provided the pretext for organised resistance. Archaeological evidence from the site of Igor's death near Iskorostan reveals signs of a substantial military confrontation, including weapon deposits and evidence of fortification construction that suggest the Drevlians were prepared for extended warfare. The material culture from this site includes both Rus's military equipment and Drevlian weapons, indicating that the conflict involves significant forces on both sides. The manner of Igor's death, as described in later sources involving his torture and execution by the Drevlians, reflected the accumulated resentment that had built up over decades of tribute collection and the desire to send a clear message about the consequences of excessive demands. Archaeological evidence from Drevlian burial sites during this period reveals the presence of high-status grave goods that may have been taken from Rus's officials, suggesting that the revolt involved systematic attacks on the administrative apparatus that supported tribute collection throughout Drevlian territory. The succession crisis that followed Igor's death threatened the stability of the entire Rus' state. As his heir Sviatoslav was still a child, and the military and administrative structures that supported central authority required effective leadership to function properly. Archaeological evidence from major centres reveals signs of reduced construction activity and administrative disruption during the immediate aftermath of Igor's death, suggesting that the crisis had significant impacts on the normal functioning of the government. The material culture from this period shows evidence of hoarding behaviour and defensive preparations that indicate widespread uncertainty about the political future. Olga's assumption of regency represented a remarkable political achievement, as the acceptance of female authority in a society dominated by warrior culture required exceptional personal capabilities and careful management of competing interests. Archaeological evidence from Kiev reveals substantial construction activity that began shortly after Olga established her authority, including the expansion of administrative facilities and the construction of new residential complexes for the ruling elite. The scale and sophistication of these projects indicate that Olga quickly established effective control over the resources necessary for major public works. The military campaigns that Olga launched against the Drevlians demonstrated both her determination to avenge Igor's death and her understanding of the need to re-establish Rus's authority over tributary populations. Archaeological evidence from Drevlian territories reveals systematic destruction at multiple sites, followed by reconstruction under direct Rus's supervision. The pattern of destruction and rebuilding suggests a deliberate campaign to eliminate the leadership and infrastructure that had supported the revolt while establishing more direct control over the population. The siege of Iskorostan, the Drevlian capital, became legendary for the innovative tactics that Olga employed to overcome the city's formidable natural and artificial defences. Archaeological investigation of the site reveals evidence of extensive fortifications that would have been extremely difficult to assault using conventional methods. The defensive arrangements included multiple lines of earthen ramparts, timber palisades, and natural obstacles that channeled attackers into predetermined killing zones. The sophistication of these defences explains why Olga chose to employ deception and psychological warfare rather than direct assault. The administrative reforms that Olga implemented following the suppression of the Drevlian revolt represented a systematic attempt to address the structural problems that had contributed to the crisis. Archaeological evidence reveals the establishment of permanent administrative centres throughout the tributary territories, each equipped with facilities for local tribute collection and storage. The standardisation of administrative procedures and the appointment of permanent officials to oversee tribute collection reduced the need for the disruptive annual circuits that had characterised Igor's system. The introduction of standardised tribute assessments based on systematic evaluation of local productive capacity represented a significant improvement over the arbitrary demands that had previously characterised Rus's taxation. Archaeological evidence reveals the development of uniform procedures for measuring agricultural production, evaluating craft output, and assessing the availability of forest products. The implementation of these procedures required substantial investment in administrative infrastructure and the training of officials capable of conducting systematic economic assessments. The establishment of regular tribute collection schedules that coordinated with seasonal agricultural cycles reduced the economic disruption that had previously characterized Rus's taxation. Archaeological evidence from agricultural settlements reveals more stable production patterns following the implementation of Olga's reforms, suggesting that predictable tribute obligations allowed communities to plan their economic activities more effectively. The material culture from this period shows evidence of agricultural intensification and craft specialization that indicates improved economic conditions under the reformed system. Olga's conversion to Christianity around 957 AD represented a momentous decision that would have profound implications for the future development of Rus's civilization. Archaeological evidence from Kiev reveals the construction of Christian religious facilities during this period, including what may have been the first church built specifically for Christian worship in the Rus territories. The architectural techniques employed in these structures show Byzantine influence, suggesting that Olga's conversion was accompanied by the importation of Christian craftsmen and religious specialists from the Byzantine Empire. The diplomatic mission that accompanied Olga's journey to Constantinople for her baptism demonstrated the sophisticated diplomatic capabilities that the Rus' state had developed under her leadership. Archaeological evidence from preparation sites reveals the substantial resources invested in this embassy, including the production of luxury goods for presentation to the Byzantine emperor and the assembly of a retinue that would appropriately represent Rus's wealth and power. The scale of these preparations indicates that Olga understood the importance of diplomatic ceremony in establishing favourable relationships with foreign powers. The reception that Olga received in Constantinople, as documented in Byzantine sources, reflected the recognition of the Rus state as a major regional power whose friendship was valuable to the Byzantine Empire. Archaeological evidence from the imperial palace complex reveals modifications made to accommodate foreign embassies, including the construction of specialized quarters for visiting dignitaries and their retinues. The material culture associated with these diplomatic facilities shows the cosmopolitan nature of Byzantine court culture and the importance placed on impressive ceremonial displays. The religious and political implications of Olga's conversion extended far beyond her personal spiritual transformation to encompass questions about the future religious orientation of the entire Rus state. Archaeological evidence from major centres reveals the gradual appearance of Christian symbols and artifacts alongside traditional pagan religious materials, suggesting a period of religious coexistence rather than immediate conversion. The material culture from this transitional period shows the complex process of cultural adaptation that accompanied the introduction of Christianity into a predominantly pagan society. The resistance to Christianity among the traditional military elite reflected their attachment to the pagan religious traditions that had provided spiritual justification for their warrior culture. Archaeological evidence from elite burial sites reveals the continued importance of traditional pagan burial practices, including the deposition of weapons and the construction of burial mounds that reflected pre-Christian religious beliefs. The persistence of these practices indicates that Olga's conversion did not immediately transform the religious orientation of Rus's society as a whole. The administrative innovations that Olga introduced during her regency established institutional frameworks that would continue to function effectively long after her death. Archaeological evidence reveals the development of permanent record-keeping systems, including the use of written documents for administrative purposes and the establishment of archives for storing important governmental records. The adoption of these Byzantine administrative practices represented a significant advance in governmental sophistication that enhanced the effectiveness of central authority while reducing the personal burden on individual rulers. The regency period under Olga's careful administration had stabilized the internal structures of the Rus' state, but by the 960s, a new generation of warriors had emerged who possessed neither personal memory of the devastating Drevlian revolt nor appreciation for the administrative complexities that had required Olga's patient diplomatic solutions. Sviatoslav Igorovich, reaching maturity around 962 AD, embodied the aggressive military culture that had originally established Varangian dominance in Eastern Europe, but had been temporarily moderated by the practical requirements of territorial governance. Archaeological evidence from Kiev reveals substantial changes in the material culture of the ruling elite during this period, with increased emphasis on military equipment and the appearance of weapons and armour styles that reflected contact with diverse military traditions from across the Eurasian steppe. The warrior prince who emerged to claim his inheritance represented a fundamental departure from the cautious consolidation that had characterized his mother's regency. Contemporary accounts describe Sviatoslav as a ruler who preferred military campaigns to administrative duties, sleeping on the ground with his soldiers and carrying only the most essential equipment during his constant travels between battlefields. Archaeological evidence from temporary military camps along his campaign routes reveals the Spartan conditions that Sviatoslav and his forces accepted during their extended expeditions, with minimal shelter construction and evidence of rapid movement between widely separated theatres of operation. The military culture that Sviatoslav embodied drew inspiration from diverse sources that reflected the cosmopolitan nature of the Rus' territories and their extensive contacts with neighbouring peoples. Archaeological finds from warrior graves dating to this period reveal weapons and equipment that combined Scandinavian traditions with innovations derived from contact with Byzantine, Khazar, and nomadic steppe military practices. The presence of specialized cavalry equipment alongside traditional infantry weapons indicates the development of more flexible military formations capable of adapting to different tactical situations and terrain conditions. The strategic situation that Sviatoslav inherited included ongoing tensions with the Khazar Khaganate, whose control over the lower Volga trade routes continued to limit Rus' commercial expansion into the lucrative markets of Central Asia and the Islamic world. Archaeological evidence from the border regions between Rus and Khazar territories reveals the construction of substantial fortifications designed to control river traffic and monitor nomadic movements across the steppe frontier. The scale of these defensive works indicates that both powers recognized the inevitability of eventual military confrontation over control of the eastern trade networks. The Khazar Khaganate that Sviatoslav targeted for destruction represented one of the most sophisticated political entities in Eastern Europe, with an urban civilization centered on the Volga Delta city of Itil and an administrative system that governed diverse populations across vast territories stretching from the Caucasus Mountains to the Middle Volga region. Archaeological excavations at Khazar sites reveal a cosmopolitan material culture that included elements from Byzantine, Islamic, and local traditions, reflecting the Khaganate's role as a major centre for international trade and cultural exchange. The wealth accumulated through control of transcontinental trade routes had enabled the Khazars to maintain professional military forces and sophisticated diplomatic relationships with major powers throughout the region. The military preparations for Sviatoslav's assault on the Khazar Khaganate required the coordination of forces from throughout the Rus' territories and the development of new tactical approaches adapted to steppe warfare conditions. Archaeological evidence from assembly points reveals the concentration of substantial military resources, including specialized equipment for siege warfare and cavalry operations that differed significantly from the river-based warfare that had characterized earlier Rus' military campaigns. The presence of nomadic-style horse gear and archery equipment alongside traditional Scandinavian weapons indicates the integration of steppe military techniques into Rus' tactical doctrine. The campaign against the Khazars began with systematic attacks on the outlying fortifications and trading posts that protected the approaches to the Khazar heartland. Archaeological evidence from sites along the Don and Volga rivers reveals destruction layers that correspond to this initial phase of Sviatoslav's offensive, followed by the establishment of Rus' military bases designed to consolidate territorial gains and support further advances. The pattern of destruction and reconstruction suggests a methodical approach to territorial conquest that prioritized the elimination of Khazar administrative infrastructure while preserving the economic resources that had made these regions valuable. The assault on Sarkel, the massive Khazar fortress that controlled the Don River crossing, demonstrated Sviatoslav's ability to conduct sophisticated siege operations against heavily fortified positions. Archaeological investigation of the site reveals evidence of systematic destruction that required advanced siege techniques, including the use of siege engines and coordinated assault tactics that overcame the fortress's formidable stone and brick defences. The thoroughness of the destruction at Sarkel indicates Sviatoslav's determination to eliminate Khazar military capabilities rather than simply capturing strategic positions for his own use. The advance toward the Khazar capital at Itil required Sviatoslav's forces to traverse hundreds of kilometers of steppe territory while maintaining supply lines and coordinating with allied nomadic groups who had their own grievances against Khazar authority. Archaeological evidence from temporary camps along this route reveals the logistical challenges involved in supporting a substantial military force during extended operations in hostile territory. The material culture from these sites shows evidence of careful resource management and the integration of local procurement methods with supplies transported from Rus' territories. The destruction of Itil represented the culmination of Sviatoslav's anti-Khazar campaign and effectively ended the Khazar Khaganate as a significant political force in Eastern Europe. Archaeological evidence from the site reveals systematic demolition of major buildings and infrastructure, including the destruction of administrative facilities, religious buildings and commercial installations that had formed the foundation of Khazar power. The scale of destruction indicates that Sviatoslav intended to eliminate the possibility of Khazar recovery, rather than simply establishing Rus' control over existing institutions. The elimination of Khazar power created a political vacuum in the lower Volga region that fundamentally altered the balance of power throughout Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Archaeological evidence from former Khazar territories reveals the rapid collapse of the administrative and commercial systems that had sustained urban civilization in the region, with many settlements being abandoned or experiencing dramatic reductions in population and economic activity. The disruption of established trade networks had far-reaching consequences that affected commercial relationships from Scandinavia to Central Asia. The immediate beneficiaries of Khazar collapse included various nomadic groups who had previously been subject to Khazar authority, particularly the Pechenegs, who expanded their territorial control into regions that had been under Khazar administration. Archaeological evidence reveals the establishment of Pecheneg settlements in areas that had previously been part of the Khazar administrative system, indicating a fundamental shift in the ethnic and political composition of the steppe frontier. The rise of Pecheneg power would subsequently create new challenges for Rus' expansion and territorial security. The economic consequences of Khazar destruction extended far beyond the immediate military objectives that had motivated Sviatoslav's campaign. The elimination of Khazar control over eastern trade routes disrupted commercial networks that had functioned for centuries, forcing merchants to develop alternative transportation methods and trading relationships. Archaeological evidence from trading centres throughout the region reveals significant changes in the types and quantities of goods being exchanged, with particular impacts on the flow of Islamic silver and Central Asian luxury goods that had previously moved through Khazar-controlled networks. The success of the Khazar campaign encouraged Sviatoslav to pursue even more ambitious military objectives, including intervention in the complex political situation developing in the Balkans, where the Byzantine Empire faced challenges from the expanding Bulgarian state. Archaeological evidence from preparation sites reveals the assembly of substantial military forces for operations far from the Rus' heartland, including specialized equipment for siege warfare and naval operations that would be necessary for campaigns in the Danube region. The scale of these preparations indicates that Sviatoslav viewed the Balkan intervention as an opportunity for territorial expansion rather than simply a military expedition for plunder. The invitation from Byzantine Emperor Nicephorus II Phocas to attack the Bulgarian state represented a diplomatic opportunity that aligned with Sviatoslav's military ambitions, while providing official justification for intervention in Balkan affairs. Archaeological evidence suggests that Sviatoslav recognized the potential for establishing permanent Rus' control over the mouth of the Danube River, which would provide access to alternative trade routes and reduce dependence on the traditional Dnieper route that remained vulnerable to nomadic interference. The strategic advantages of controlling both the Dnieper and Danube river systems would have given the Rus state unprecedented influence over trade between Northern Europe and the Byzantine Empire. The initial phase of Sviatoslav's Bulgarian campaign achieved rapid success against Bulgarian forces that were unprepared for the tactical innovations and military intensity that characterized Rus' warfare. Archaeological evidence from Bulgarian settlements reveals destruction layers that correspond to the period of Rus' invasion, followed by the establishment of Rus' administrative presence at strategic locations throughout the conquered territories. The material culture from this period shows the introduction of Rus' military equipment and administrative practices alongside the continuation of local Bulgarian traditions. The capture of the Bulgarian capital at Preslav provided Sviatoslav with control over the administrative and economic infrastructure of the Bulgarian state, including access to the wealth that had been accumulated through Bulgarian control of Balkan trade routes. Archaeological excavations at Preslav reveal evidence of substantial Rus military presence, including the construction of fortifications designed to protect the city against potential Byzantine retaliation. The modifications made to existing Bulgarian administrative facilities indicate Sviatoslav's intention to establish permanent Rus' control over the conquered territories rather than treating them as temporary occupations. The establishment of Rus' authority in Bulgaria required the integration of diverse military traditions, as Sviatoslav's forces incorporated Bulgarian cavalry techniques and siege warfare methods that were adapted to Balkan terrain and fortification styles. Archaeological evidence reveals the presence of mixed military equipment that combined Rus, Bulgarian, and Byzantine elements, indicating rapid tactical adaptation to local conditions. The development of these hybrid military capabilities would prove crucial during the subsequent confrontation with Byzantine forces. The Byzantine response to Sviatoslav's Bulgarian success revealed the empire's recognition that Rus' control over the Danube region posed an unacceptable threat to Byzantine security and commercial interests. Archaeological evidence from Byzantine military preparations reveals the assembly of substantial forces equipped with specialized siege equipment and naval capabilities designed to counter Rus' tactical advantages. The scale of Byzantine military mobilization indicates that the empire viewed the Rus' presence in Bulgaria as an existential threat requiring decisive military action. The arrival of Byzantine forces under John Tzimiskes initiated a series of campaigns that demonstrated the evolution of Rus's military capabilities through their adaptation to sustained warfare against the most sophisticated military power in the medieval world. Archaeological evidence from battlefield sites reveals the presence of advanced military equipment on both sides, including Byzantine Greek fire apparatus and Rus's siege engines that had been adapted from various sources. The material culture from these confrontations shows the technological innovation that resulted from prolonged military competition between major powers. The siege of Dorostelon represented the climactic confrontation between Rus's and Byzantine forces, with both sides employing their most advanced military techniques and equipment in a struggle that would determine control over the entire Danube region. Archaeological investigation of the site reveals evidence of sophisticated siege warfare, including the construction of elaborate defensive works and the use of advanced siege engines by both attackers and defenders. The duration and intensity of the siege indicate that both sides recognize the strategic importance of the outcome for their future territorial and commercial prospects. The military innovations that emerged during Sviatoslav's campaigns reflected the synthesis of diverse tactical traditions that characterized the cosmopolitan nature of medieval warfare in Eastern Europe. The integration of Scandinavian infantry tactics with nomadic cavalry techniques and Byzantine siege warfare methods created flexible military formations capable of adapting to varied terrain and enemy capabilities. Archaeological evidence reveals the development of specialized equipment designed to support these hybrid tactical approaches, including weapons and armor that combined elements from multiple military traditions. The naval capabilities that Sviatoslav's forces developed during their Danube campaigns represented a significant evolution from the traditional river-based warfare that had characterized earlier Rus's military operations. Archaeological evidence from shipbuilding sites reveals the construction of vessels designed specifically for operations in the challenging conditions of the lower Danube, including ships capable of both river navigation and limited maritime operations in the Black Sea. The technical sophistication of these vessels indicates the rapid development of naval expertise that would have implications for future Rus's military capabilities. The logistical achievements that supported Sviatoslav's extended campaigns in distant theatres demonstrated the administrative and organizational capabilities that the Rus state had developed under his predecessors. Archaeological evidence reveals the establishment of supply lines extending from the Rus' heartland to the Balkan theatre, including the construction of supply depots and the coordination of transportation systems that could maintain substantial military forces during prolonged operations. The scale of these logistical operations indicates sophisticated planning and resource management that went far beyond traditional raiding expedition capabilities. The diplomatic complexities that surrounded Sviatoslav's Balkan campaigns reflected the multipolar nature of medieval Eastern European politics, where the interests of the Rus, Byzantine Empire, Bulgaria, Hungary, and various nomadic groups intersected in constantly shifting patterns of alliance and conflict. Archaeological evidence from diplomatic sites reveals the material culture associated with international negotiations, including facilities for housing foreign embassies and the exchange of gifts that sealed diplomatic agreements. The sophistication of these diplomatic arrangements indicates the recognition of the Rus state as a legitimate participant in the complex diplomatic relationships that governed medieval European politics. The fatal encounter with the Pechenegs at the Dnieper Rapids in 972 AD represented the culmination of the strategic overextension that had characterized Sviatoslav's military ambitions. Archaeological evidence from the site suggests that the Pecheneg attack was carefully planned to exploit the vulnerability of Rus's forces during their withdrawal from the Balkan campaigns, when they were laden with plunder and operating far from their territorial base. The location of the attack at the Dnieper Rapids indicated Pecheneg knowledge of Rus's transportation patterns and their ability to coordinate large-scale military operations against a formidable opponent. The circumstances of Sviatoslav's death reflected both the personal courage that had characterized his military leadership and the strategic miscalculations that had led to his forces' isolation in hostile territory. Archaeological evidence from the battle site reveals the intensity of the fighting and the presence of high-quality weapons and equipment that indicate the elite nature of the forces involved in the final confrontation. The material culture from this site shows the cosmopolitan nature of the military equipment used by both sides, reflecting the complex cultural exchanges that had characterized Sviatoslav's campaigns. The succession crisis that followed Sviatoslav's death threatened the stability of the entire Rus state, as his territorial conquests had been held together primarily through his personal military leadership, rather than institutional structures capable of functioning independently. Archaeological evidence from major centres reveals signs of administrative disruption and reduced construction activity during the immediate aftermath of his death, indicating the impact of the succession struggle on the normal functioning of the government. The material culture from this period shows evidence of hoarding and defensive preparations that suggest widespread uncertainty about the political future and the possibility of renewed internal conflict. The fraternal civil war that erupted following Sviatoslav's death represented the most serious internal crisis the Rus state had faced since its founding, as three of his sons, Yaropolk in Kiev, Oleg among the Drevlians, and Vladimir in Novgorod, each commanded substantial military forces and possessed legitimate claims to portions of their father's inheritance. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals the rapid militarization of major centres, with extensive construction of new fortifications and the accumulation of weapons that indicate preparation for prolonged warfare. The material culture shows a marked increase in the production of military equipment, including standardized spearheads, axes, and arrowheads, that suggest coordinated preparation for large-scale conflict across multiple territories. Vladimir's initial position as the youngest brother and ruler of the northernmost territories placed him at a significant disadvantage in the succession struggle, as his base in Novgorod provided fewer resources and smaller populations than the southern territories controlled by his brothers. Archaeological excavations at Rurikovo Gorodishche reveal extensive defensive preparations during the late 970s, including the construction of additional earthen ramparts and the establishment of weapon storage facilities that indicate Vladimir's recognition of his vulnerable position. The material evidence suggests that Vladimir understood the necessity of seeking external military support to overcome the advantages possessed by his brothers. The decision to flee to Scandinavia represented a calculated strategic withdrawal that allowed Vladimir to recruit the military assistance necessary to challenge his brother's superior resources. Archaeological evidence from Scandinavian sites reveals increased activity during this period, including the assembly of military equipment and the preparation of vessels for major expeditions. The material culture associated with these preparations shows the continued connections between the Rus territories and their Scandinavian origins, with evidence of recruitment activities that drew upon traditional networks of kinship and military obligation that extended across the Baltic region. The Varangian mercenaries that Vladimir recruited for his return expedition represented some of the most experienced warriors available in northern Europe, drawn from the ranks of professional fighters who had participated in campaigns across the continent. Archaeological evidence from their equipment reveals high-quality weapons and armour that included pattern-welded swords, mail shirts, and specialised archery equipment that reflected the latest developments in military technology. The standardisation of equipment types suggests coordinated procurement and the involvement of established military contractors who specialised in equipping large-scale expeditions. Vladimir's return to Novgorod with Varangian reinforcements marked the beginning of a systematic campaign to eliminate his brothers and consolidate control over the entire Rus' inheritance. Archaeological evidence from the route of his advance reveals the establishment of temporary military bases and the construction of siege equipment designed for assaulting heavily fortified positions. The material culture from these sites shows evidence of careful logistical planning, including the stockpiling of provisions and the establishment of supply lines that could support extended military operations across vast distances. The Siege of Polotsk represented Vladimir's first major test against established opposition, as the city's strategic position on the western Dvina River made it a crucial control point for northern trade routes. Archaeological investigation reveals evidence of sophisticated siege warfare, including the construction of earthen ramps designed to overcome the city's elevated defensive position and the use of specialized equipment for breaching timber and stone fortifications. The archaeological records show signs of intense fighting, including weapon deposits and evidence of fire damage that indicates the ferocity of the assault. The capture of Polotsk provided Vladimir with both strategic advantages and the notorious incident involving Rogneda, daughter of the local prince, whose forced marriage to Vladimir demonstrated the brutal realities of medieval political consolidation. Archaeological evidence from Polotsk during this period reveals significant changes in the material culture of the ruling elite, with the replacement of local aristocratic burial practices by those characteristic of Vladimir's forces. The construction of new administrative facilities and the establishment of Varangian military garrisons indicate the systematic replacement of existing political structures with institutions loyal to Vladimir's authority. The advance toward Kiev required careful coordination of multiple military columns and the neutralization of fortified positions that controlled river crossings and transportation routes. Archaeological evidence from sites along Vladimir's route reveals the systematic destruction of defensive installations, followed by their reconstruction under his control. The material culture from these locations shows the integration of Varangian military techniques with local fortification traditions, creating hybrid defensive systems that combine the best features of both approaches. The confrontation with Yaropolk near Kiev demonstrated Vladimir's development into a sophisticated military commander, capable of coordinating complex tactical operations against experienced opponents. Archaeological evidence from the battlefield reveals the presence of diverse military equipment that reflects the cosmopolitan nature of the forces involved, including Varangian weapons, Slavic military gear, and equipment derived from contact with nomadic steppe peoples. The distribution pattern of artifacts suggests tactical formations that combined infantry and cavalry elements in coordinated assault operations. The elimination of Yaropolk through treachery, rather than direct military confrontation, reflected Vladimir's pragmatic approach to political consolidation and his understanding that prolonged warfare would weaken the state regardless of the eventual victor. Archaeological evidence from Kiev reveals minimal destruction during the transition of power, suggesting that Vladimir's assumption of control was accomplished through political maneuvering rather than destructive siege warfare. The material culture shows continuity in administrative practices and the retention of existing governmental infrastructure under new leadership. The integration of Varangian mercenaries into the permanent military structure of the Rus' state required careful management of their expectations and the provision of appropriate rewards for their service. Archaeological evidence reveals the establishment of special quarters for foreign warriors within major cities, including facilities designed to accommodate their cultural practices and religious observances. The material culture associated with these areas shows the maintenance of Scandinavian traditions alongside gradual adaptation to local conditions and customs. The consolidation of power throughout the Rus' territories involved the systematic replacement of potentially disloyal local administrators, with appointees whose loyalty to Vladimir had been demonstrated during the Civil War. Archaeological evidence from administrative centres reveals changes in building construction techniques and the establishment of new facilities for housing appointed officials and their retinues. The standardization of administrative practices across these centres indicates the implementation of uniform governmental procedures that strengthened central control while reducing regional autonomy. The military reforms that Vladimir implemented following his consolidation of power reflected lessons learned during the Civil War and the need to prevent future succession crises. Archaeological evidence reveals the establishment of permanent military garrisons at strategic locations throughout the territory, equipped with standardized weapons and supported by regular supply systems. The construction of specialized training facilities and the evidence for systematic military drill indicate the development of professional military capabilities that went beyond traditional warrior band structures. The economic policies that Vladimir pursued during the early years of his reign focused on rebuilding the prosperity that had been disrupted by the succession war and establishing stable revenue sources for governmental operations. Archaeological evidence reveals investment in infrastructure projects, including the improvement of portage routes between river systems and the construction of warehouse facilities at major trading centres. The material culture shows increased production of goods for international trade, including standardized fur processing and the manufacture of luxury items designed for foreign markets. The religious situation that Vladimir inherited included a complex mixture of Slavic paganism, Scandinavian religious traditions, and limited Christian influence that reflected the diverse cultural composition of the Rus territories. Archaeological evidence from religious sites reveals the continuation of traditional pagan practices, including the construction of temple complexes and the deposition of votive offerings that followed pre-Christian religious traditions. The material culture associated with these sites shows the synthesis of different pagan traditions into hybrid religious practices that reflected the political unification of diverse tribal groups. The establishment of the pagan pantheon in Kiev around 980 AD represented Vladimir's attempt to create religious unity among his diverse subjects through the promotion of a standardized polytheistic system. Archaeological evidence from the temple complex reveals sophisticated construction techniques and the use of imported materials that demonstrate the substantial resources invested in this religious project. The presence of idols representing deities from different cultural traditions indicates Vladimir's recognition of the need to accommodate the religious sensibilities of various population groups while promoting political unity. The systematic evaluation of world religions that Vladimir allegedly conducted during the 980s reflects the sophisticated diplomatic and intellectual capabilities that the Rus' state had developed by this period. Archaeological evidence from Kiev reveals the presence of foreign religious specialists and diplomatic representatives, including facilities for housing visiting clergy and the exchange of religious texts and artifacts. The material culture associated with these activities shows the cosmopolitan nature of Vladimir's court and its connections to major religious and political centres throughout the medieval world. The detailed investigation of Byzantine Christianity involved extensive diplomatic contact with Constantinople and careful evaluation of both religious doctrine and political implications. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals increased Byzantine presence in Kiev, including the establishment of facilities for housing visiting clergy and diplomatic representatives. The material culture shows the importation of Byzantine religious artifacts, including icons, liturgical vessels, and religious texts that provided concrete examples of Christian religious practice and artistic traditions. The political considerations that influenced Vladimir's religious choice extended far beyond theological concerns to encompass questions of international diplomacy, internal governance, and long-term strategic positioning. The Byzantine Empire represented the most sophisticated and wealthy neighbour of the Rus' state, offering opportunities for profitable commercial relationships and access to advanced technological and cultural innovations. Archaeological evidence reveals the substantial volume of trade between the Rus' territories and Byzantium, including the exchange of northern products for Byzantine luxury goods, silk textiles, and precious metals that form the foundation of elite material culture. The military alliance that accompanied Vladimir's religious decision provided immediate strategic advantages in the form of Byzantine military support against common enemies and access to advanced military technologies and tactical innovations. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals the appearance of Byzantine military equipment in Rus's contexts, including specialized siege engines, improved armor designs, and naval technologies that enhanced Rus's military capabilities. The material culture shows the integration of Byzantine military techniques with existing Rus's practices, creating hybrid approaches that combine the advantages of both traditions. The marriage alliance with Anna Porphyrogenita represented an unprecedented diplomatic achievement that elevated the Rus' state to equality with the major powers of the medieval world. Archaeological evidence from wedding preparations reveals the enormous resources invested in ceremonial displays designed to demonstrate Rus's wealth and sophistication to Byzantine observers. The material culture associated with these events includes luxury goods, ceremonial weapons, and decorative objects that reflected the highest levels of craftsmanship available in the Rus territories. The mass baptism of Kiev in 988 AD represented one of the most dramatic religious transformations in medieval history, involving the systematic conversion of an entire urban population from paganism to Christianity within a matter of days. Archaeological evidence from the Dnieper River reveals the construction of temporary facilities designed to accommodate large numbers of baptismal candidates, including platforms and changing areas that could handle the logistical requirements of mass conversion. The material culture from this period shows the rapid replacement of pagan religious objects with Christian symbols and artifacts, indicating the thoroughness of the religious transformation. The destruction of pagan idols and temples that accompanied the mass conversion involved the systematic elimination of physical symbols of the old religious system and their replacement with Christian religious infrastructure. Archaeological evidence reveals the deliberate destruction of pagan temple complexes and the construction of Christian churches on the same sites, symbolically demonstrating the replacement of old religious practices with new ones. The material culture shows the recycling of materials from destroyed pagan structures into Christian building projects, reflecting both practical economy and symbolic transformation. The establishment of ecclesiastical hierarchy throughout the Rus' territories required the importation of trained clergy and the development of educational institutions capable of producing local religious leadership. Archaeological evidence reveals the construction of episcopal residences, monastic complexes, and schools designed to support the new religious infrastructure. The material culture associated with these institutions includes religious texts, liturgical objects, and educational materials that indicate the systematic implementation of Christian religious practices and learning. The cultural transformation that accompanied Christianization extended far beyond religious observance to encompass fundamental changes in artistic expression, legal traditions, and social organization. Archaeological evidence reveals the rapid adoption of Byzantine artistic styles, including the construction of churches using Byzantine architectural techniques and the production of religious art that followed Constantinople models. The material culture shows the integration of Christian symbols into decorative traditions, the adoption of new burial practices, and the development of legal procedures based on Christian principles. The introduction of literacy as a component of Christian education represented a revolutionary development that would transform the intellectual capabilities of Rus' society. Archaeological evidence reveals the establishment of scriptoriums and libraries, including facilities for copying religious texts and producing educational materials. The material culture associated with literacy includes writing implements, parchment, and books that indicate the systematic development of written culture alongside oral traditions that had previously dominated intellectual life. The architectural innovations that accompanied church construction introduced building techniques and aesthetic principles that would influence Rus's material culture for centuries. Archaeological evidence from early church sites reveals the adaptation of Byzantine architectural principles to local materials and construction capabilities, creating distinctive architectural styles that combined foreign influences with indigenous traditions. The material culture associated with church construction includes specialized tools, imported building materials, and decorative elements that demonstrate the technological and artistic sophistication of the new religious architecture. The legal transformations that followed Christianization involved the introduction of written law codes based on Byzantine legal principles, while maintaining elements of customary law that reflected local traditions and practical requirements. Archaeological evidence reveals the establishment of courts and administrative facilities designed to implement the new legal system, including buildings for housing legal proceedings and storing legal documents. The material culture associated with legal administration includes scales, weights, and measuring devices that indicate the systematic implementation of standardized legal procedures. The economic implications of Christianization included both the costs of establishing new religious infrastructure and the benefits of enhanced diplomatic and commercial relationships with the Christian world. Archaeological evidence reveals substantial investment in church construction, the support of clergy, and the production of religious artifacts that required significant resource allocation. The material culture shows increased trade with Christian territories, including the importation of religious objects and the export of goods to newly accessible markets that had been closed to pagan rulers. The consolidation of Christian authority throughout the Rus' territories under Vladimir's successors faced immediate challenges as his death in 1015 AD triggered another devastating succession crisis that threatened to undo the religious and political achievements of the previous generation. Archaeological evidence from major centres reveals widespread destruction during the fraternal warfare that erupted between Vladimir's sons, with Svyatopolk's brutal elimination of Boris and Gleb, creating martyrs whose deaths would profoundly influence the development of Rus' Christian identity. The material culture from this period shows evidence of hasty defensive preparations and the hoarding of valuable goods, indicating the population's recognition that the succession struggle posed existential threats to established communities and institutions. Yaroslav's victory over Svyatopolk at the Battle of Lubeck in 1016 AD represented more than simple military triumph, but rather the beginning of a systematic effort to establish stable dynastic succession procedures that would prevent future civil wars from devastating the realm. Archaeological excavations at the battlefield site reveal evidence of sophisticated tactical planning, including the construction of field fortifications and the deployment of mixed infantry and cavalry formations that demonstrated Yaroslav's evolution into a skilled military commander. The weapon deposits from this engagement show the presence of high-quality military equipment on both sides, including pattern-welded swords, mail armour, and specialised siege equipment that indicates the substantial resources both brothers could command for their conflict. The final confrontation with Svyatopolk at the Battle of the Alta River in 1019 AD established Yaroslav's undisputed authority over the southern Rus' territories and ended the succession crisis that had threatened to fragment the realm. Archaeological evidence from the battle site reveals the scale of the engagement, with weapon deposits and skeletal remains indicating casualties that numbered in the thousands. The material culture associated with this battle includes coins, jewellery, and personal equipment from warriors representing diverse ethnic backgrounds, reflecting the cosmopolitan nature of the military forces that participated in these succession struggles. The thoroughness of Yaroslav's victory is evidenced by the complete disappearance of Svyatopolk's supporters from the archaeological record, suggesting systematic elimination of potential opposition. The establishment of stable dynastic rule under Yaroslav required fundamental reforms to the succession system that had repeatedly produced civil wars throughout Russia's history. Archaeological evidence from Kiev reveals extensive construction of new administrative facilities designed to house permanent governmental institutions, rather than the temporary arrangements that had characterized earlier rulers. The material culture from these administrative centers shows the development of sophisticated record-keeping systems, including the use of lead seals for authenticating documents and the establishment of archives for storing important governmental records. The standardization of administrative procedures across multiple centers indicates the implementation of systematic governance that reduced dependence on individual rulers' personal capabilities. The creation of the Russkaya Pravda represented the culmination of centuries of legal development that synthesized Slavic customary law, Scandinavian legal traditions, and Byzantine jurisprudence into a comprehensive legal code that would govern Russia's society for generations. Archaeological evidence from court sites reveals the establishment of permanent judicial facilities equipped with standardized weights, measures, and legal instruments that enabled consistent application of legal principles. The material culture associated with legal administration includes specialized scales for weighing silver payments, measuring devices for assessing property values, and storage facilities for maintaining legal documents and precedents. The legal innovations contained within the Russkaya Pravda addressed fundamental problems that had plagued Russia's society, including the regulation of blood feuds through systematic compensation payments and the establishment of property rights that protected both individual ownership and community interests. Archaeological evidence from settlement sites reveals changes in property boundary markers and the construction of storage facilities that reflect the enhanced security of private property under the new legal system. The material culture shows evidence of increased commercial activity, including the standardization of weights and measures that facilitated trade relationships and the development of credit arrangements that required legal enforcement mechanisms. The synthesis of legal traditions within the Russkaya Pravda reflected the complex cultural heritage of Russia's society, incorporating Slavic concepts of collective responsibility alongside Scandinavian traditions of individual honor and Byzantine principles of written law. Archaeological evidence from diverse settlement types reveals the flexible application of legal principles that accommodated local customs while maintaining overall consistency in legal procedures. The material culture associated with legal disputes includes standardized payment methods, witness tokens, and ceremonial objects used in oath-taking procedures that demonstrate the sophisticated procedural requirements of the new legal system. The architectural achievements that characterized Yaroslav's reign represented a conscious effort to create monumental buildings that would demonstrate the wealth, sophistication, and Christian identity of the Russian state to both domestic and foreign observers. The construction of St. Sophia Cathedral in Kiev, begun around 1037 AD, required the coordination of massive resources and the importation of skilled craftsmen from throughout the Christian world. Archaeological investigation of the construction site reveals evidence of advanced engineering techniques, including the use of sophisticated foundation systems designed to support the enormous weight of the brick and stone superstructure. The material culture associated with the construction includes specialized tools, imported building materials, and decorative elements that demonstrate the international scope of the building project. The architectural design of St. Sophia Cathedral reflected the adaptation of Byzantine building principles to local materials and construction capabilities, while creating distinctive features that would characterize Russia's ecclesiastical architecture for centuries. Archaeological evidence from the construction process reveals the integration of local timber construction techniques with imported masonry traditions, creating hybrid building methods that combine the advantages of both approaches. The material culture includes evidence of specialized workshops established specifically for producing architectural elements, including carved stone capitals, decorative metalwork and mosaic materials that required highly skilled craftsmen working under imperial patronage. The interior decoration of St. Sophia Cathedral involved the creation of one of the most sophisticated artistic programs in medieval Eastern Europe, combining Byzantine mosaic techniques with local artistic traditions to create a unique synthesis of international and indigenous influences. Archaeological evidence from workshop sites reveals the production of coloured glass tesserae, the preparation of specialised mortars for mosaic installation, and the creation of pigments for fresco painting that required advanced chemical knowledge and artistic skills. The material culture associated with these decorative arts includes imported raw materials, specialised tools, and finished artistic products that demonstrate the highest levels of craftsmanship available in the medieval world. The symbolic significance of St. Sophia Cathedral extended far beyond its religious functions to encompass political statements about Yaroslav's imperial ambitions and the Rus state's claim to equality with the Byzantine Empire. The cathedral's dedication to holy wisdom directly paralleled the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, while its architectural scale and decorative sophistication demonstrated Rus's capacity for monumental construction projects that rivaled those of established imperial powers. Archaeological evidence from contemporary construction projects reveals the systematic development of indigenous architectural capabilities that reduce dependence on foreign expertise while maintaining international standards of artistic excellence. The development of Kievan literary culture during Yaroslav's reign involved the systematic promotion of education, the establishment of libraries, and the creation of original literary works that would define Rus intellectual tradition for centuries. Archaeological evidence from educational institutions reveals the construction of schools, scriptoriums, and libraries equipped with the materials and facilities necessary for advanced learning. The material culture associated with literary production includes writing implements, parchment and paper, ink and pigments, and book-binding materials that indicate the systematic development of written culture alongside the oral traditions that had previously dominated intellectual life. The translation movement that flourished under Yaroslav's patronage involved the systematic rendering of Byzantine religious and secular texts into Church Slavonic, creating a substantial library of Christian literature accessible to Rus's readers. Archaeological evidence from scriptoriums reveals the presence of bilingual manuscripts, translation aids, and reference materials that demonstrate the sophisticated linguistic capabilities required for accurate translation work. The material culture includes evidence of specialized book production techniques, including the creation of illuminated manuscripts that combined textual content with decorative artistic elements that enhanced both aesthetic appeal and educational effectiveness. The creation of original literary works during this period included historical chronicles, religious treatises, and legal commentaries that reflected the intellectual sophistication of Yaroslav's court and its capacity for independent cultural production. Archaeological evidence from literary workshops reveals the presence of research materials, draft manuscripts, and editorial tools that demonstrate the careful preparation and revision processes involved in creating major literary works. The material culture associated with original composition includes evidence of collaborative writing projects, scholarly correspondence, and the circulation of manuscripts that indicate the development of intellectual networks extending throughout the Rus' territories and beyond. The diplomatic marriages that Yaroslav arranged for his children represented a systematic effort to establish the Rus' state as an equal participant in the complex network of dynastic relationships that governed medieval European politics. The marriage of his daughter Anna to Henry the Foal of France in 1051 AD demonstrated the international recognition of Rus's political legitimacy and the desirability of alliance relationships with the expanding Eastern power. Archaeological evidence from wedding preparations reveals the enormous resources invested in ceremonial displays designed to impress foreign observers with Rus's wealth and sophistication, including the production of luxury goods, ceremonial weapons, and decorative objects that reflected the highest levels of craftsmanship available in the realm. The marriage alliance between Yaroslav's daughter Elizabeth and Harald Hardrada of Norway created connections with Scandinavian royal houses that maintained the traditional ties between the Rus's territories and their northern origins, while establishing new diplomatic relationships based on political equality rather than tributary dependence. Archaeological evidence from diplomatic exchanges reveals the circulation of luxury goods, artistic objects, and technological innovations that accompanied these marriage alliances and facilitated cultural exchange between distant courts. The material culture associated with these diplomatic relationships includes evidence of gift exchange protocols, ceremonial objects used in wedding celebrations, and the establishment of permanent diplomatic facilities for maintaining ongoing relationships. The marriage of Yaroslav's son Vsevolod to a Byzantine princess demonstrated the success of Rus's diplomatic efforts in achieving recognition from the most prestigious court in the medieval world and establishing family connections with the imperial dynasty in Constantinople. Archaeological evidence from this alliance reveals the importation of Byzantine court culture, including artistic styles, ceremonial practices, and administrative techniques that enhance the sophistication of Rus's governmental and cultural institutions. The material culture includes evidence of Byzantine influence in decorative arts, architectural elements, and luxury goods that reflected the elevated status achieved through imperial marriage connections. The international diplomatic relationships that Yaroslav cultivated extended beyond marriage alliances to encompass commercial agreements, military cooperation, and cultural exchange that established the Rus state as a major participant in medieval European politics. Archaeological evidence from diplomatic sites reveals the presence of foreign embassies, the establishment of facilities for international negotiations, and the development of protocols for receiving and entertaining visiting dignitaries. The material culture associated with diplomatic activities includes evidence of gift exchange, ceremonial objects used in treaty negotiations, and the circulation of diplomatic correspondence that maintained ongoing relationships with multiple foreign powers. The military innovations that supported Yaroslav's diplomatic achievements included the development of professional military capabilities that could defend Rus's territories against external threats, while projecting power when necessary to support diplomatic initiatives. Archaeological evidence from military installations reveals the construction of permanent fortifications equipped with advanced defensive technologies, including improved siege engines, specialized archery equipment, and cavalry facilities that enabled rapid response to military challenges. The material culture shows the standardization of military equipment and the establishment of regular training procedures that created professional military forces capable of operating effectively against any potential opponents. The economic foundations that supported Yaroslav's cultural and diplomatic achievements required the systematic development of commercial networks, agricultural production, and craft specialization that generated the wealth necessary for major public works and international diplomacy. Archaeological evidence from trading centres reveals the expansion of warehouse facilities, the improvement of transportation infrastructure, and the establishment of permanent markets that facilitated both domestic and international commerce. The material culture shows evidence of increased production in multiple craft specialties, including metalworking, textile production, and luxury goods manufacture that supplied both domestic consumption and export markets. The administrative systems that Yaroslav developed to govern his expanded territories represented sophisticated adaptations of earlier governmental structures to the requirements of managing a major territorial state with diverse populations and complex economic relationships. Archaeological evidence from administrative centres reveals the establishment of permanent bureaucratic institutions equipped with specialised facilities for record-keeping, tax collection, and judicial proceedings. The material culture associated with governmental administration includes evidence of systematic record-keeping procedures, standardized administrative tools, and the development of communication systems that enabled coordination of activities across vast territorial expanses. The urban development that characterized major centers during Yaroslav's reign reflected both the prosperity generated by successful governance and the conscious effort to create cities that would demonstrate Rus's cultural sophistication and political importance. Archaeological evidence from Kiev reveals extensive construction of residential quarters, commercial districts, and public facilities that transform the city into a major medieval urban centre, comparable to Constantinople or Western European capitals. The material culture shows evidence of specialised urban crafts, sophisticated water management systems, and the development of urban planning principles that created functional and aesthetically pleasing city environments. The religious institutions that flourished under Yaroslav's patronage represented the full integration of Christianity into Rus's society and the development of indigenous religious traditions that combined Byzantine theological principles with local cultural practices. Archaeological evidence from monastic sites reveals the establishment of major religious communities equipped with libraries, schools, and workshops that became centres of learning and cultural production. The material culture associated with religious institutions includes evidence of manuscript production, artistic creation, and the development of distinctive liturgical practices that reflected the unique character of Rus's Christianity. The legal and judicial reforms that Yaroslav implemented created permanent institutions for administering justice and resolving disputes that enhance social stability while protecting individual rights and community interests. Archaeological evidence from court facilities reveals the establishment of permanent judicial buildings equipped with specialized facilities for conducting legal proceedings, maintaining legal records, and enforcing judicial decisions. The material culture includes evidence of standardized legal procedures, systematic penalty assessments, and the development of legal education that created a class of professional legal specialists capable of administering the complex legal system established by the Russkaya Pravda. The territorial organization that emerged during Yaroslav's reign reflected sophisticated understanding of the geographic, economic, and strategic factors that determined effective governmental control over vast and diverse territories. Archaeological evidence reveals the systematic placement of administrative centres at strategic locations throughout the realm, each equipped with facilities for local governance while maintaining coordination with central authority in Kiev. The material culture shows evidence of regular communication systems, standardized administrative procedures, and the development of regional specialization that maximized the economic potential of different territorial areas while maintaining political unity under central authority. The death of Yaroslav the Wise in 1054 AD marked the end of the unified Kievan state's golden age and the beginning of a gradual but inexorable process of political fragmentation that would fundamentally alter the character of Rus's civilization. The testament that Yaroslav left behind, dividing his territories among his 5 surviving sons according to their seniority, represented a well-intentioned attempt to prevent the fraternal warfare that had plagued earlier succession crises. However, the rota system of succession that emerged from this arrangement would prove to be one of the most consequential political innovations in medieval Eastern European history, creating unintended consequences that would ultimately undermine the very unity it was designed to preserve. Archaeological evidence from the major centres during the immediate aftermath of Yaroslav's death reveals the systematic implementation of his succession plan, with each designated heir establishing administrative control over his assigned territories. Isyaslav, as the eldest, assumed the grand princely throne in Kiev and nominal authority over the entire realm, while Sviatoslav received Chernigov, Vsevolod took Pereyaslav, Vyacheslav was granted Smolensk, and Igor received Vladimir in Volhynia. The material culture from these centres shows the rapid establishment of independent administrative apparatus, including the construction of separate treasury facilities, the development of distinct chancery practices, and the creation of autonomous military commands that would gradually erode the institutional foundations of central authority. The Rota system's fundamental principle held that succession to the grand princely throne should follow strict seniority among all male descendants of Yaroslav, with each prince advancing through a predetermined hierarchy of principalities as older relatives died and positions became vacant. Archaeological evidence from administrative centres reveals the complex record-keeping systems that developed to track genealogical relationships and succession rights, including the use of specialised seals and documents that authenticated claims to particular territories. The material culture associated with these administrative innovations shows the substantial bureaucratic apparatus required to maintain the system, including permanent facilities for genealogical research and the storage of succession-related documents. The practical implementation of the Rota system created immediate problems that its architects had failed to anticipate. Archaeological evidence from border regions between principalities reveals the construction of new fortifications and customs facilities that indicate the development of distinct territorial identities even among brothers who had previously cooperated effectively. The material culture shows the emergence of regional variations in administrative practices, including different systems of weights and measures, distinct seal designs, and specialised legal procedures that reflected the growing autonomy of individual principalities within the supposedly unified realm. The economic implications of territorial division became apparent within decades of Yaroslav's death, as individual princes began pursuing independent commercial policies that sometimes conflicted with the interests of their relatives. Archaeological evidence from trading centres reveals the establishment of separate commercial facilities for different principalities, including distinct warehouse systems, independent customs collection procedures, and the development of competing trade relationships with foreign partners. The material culture from this period shows the fragmentation of previously unified commercial networks, with evidence of trade disputes, tariff barriers, and the emergence of alternative transportation routes that bypass traditional commercial centres. The military consequences of the Rota system proved equally problematic, as the division of military resources among multiple principalities reduced the collective defensive capabilities that had enabled earlier Rus's rulers to project power effectively against external enemies. Archaeological evidence from fortification sites reveals the construction of smaller, more numerous defensive installations designed to protect individual principalities rather than coordinated defensive systems that could protect the entire realm. The material culture shows changes in military equipment and tactics that reflected the reduced scale of individual princely military forces, including the adoption of lighter armour and weapon systems that were less expensive to produce but also less effective against well-equipped opponents. The rise of regional princes as autonomous political actors represented a fundamental transformation in the nature of Rus's political authority, as rulers who had previously functioned as appointed governors of the Grand Prince began asserting independent legitimacy based on hereditary rights and local support. Archaeological evidence from princely residences reveals the construction of elaborate ceremonial facilities designed to demonstrate the dignity and authority of regional rulers, including throne rooms, reception halls, and ceremonial courtyards that rivaled those found in Kiev itself. The material culture associated with these regional courts includes evidence of independent diplomatic activities, including facilities for receiving foreign embassies and the production of ceremonial objects used in treaty negotiations. Novgorod's evolution toward autonomous governance represented the most dramatic example of regional assertion against central authority, as the city's unique commercial position and democratic traditions provided both the resources and institutional framework for effective independence. Archaeological evidence from Novgorod reveals the systematic development of indigenous governmental institutions, including the expansion of the Vece assembly facilities and the construction of specialized buildings for housing elected officials. The material culture shows the emergence of distinctively Novgorodian administrative practices, including the use of birchbark documents for record-keeping and the development of specialized commercial law that reflected the city's unique economic circumstances. The gradual autonomy of Chernigov under the Olgovichi dynasty demonstrated how successful regional princes could establish virtually independent principalities while maintaining nominal allegiance to Kiev. Archaeological evidence from Chernigov reveals extensive construction projects that rivaled those undertaken in Kiev during Yaroslav's reign, including the building of major churches, the expansion of fortifications, and the establishment of craft workshops that produced luxury goods for both domestic consumption and international trade. The material culture from Chernigov during this period shows the development of distinctive regional artistic traditions that combine traditional Rus's elements with innovations derived from independent cultural contacts. Preyaslavl's strategic position on the steppe frontier enabled its princes to develop independent relationships with nomadic peoples that sometimes conflicted with the policies pursued by other Rus principalities. Archaeological evidence from the Pereyaslavl region reveals the construction of extensive fortification systems designed specifically for defense against nomadic raids, including the development of specialized cavalry forces and the establishment of early warning systems that could coordinate responses to steppe incursions. The material culture shows the adoption of nomadic military techniques and equipment alongside traditional Rus warfare methods, creating hybrid military capabilities that reflected the unique strategic challenges faced by frontier principalities. The economic transformation that accompanied political fragmentation included the rapid growth of urban centres throughout the Russ's territories, as regional princes invested in commercial infrastructure and craft production to generate the revenues necessary for independent governance. Archaeological evidence from emerging urban centres reveals the systematic development of specialised craft quarters, including metalworking districts, textile production areas, and pottery workshops that supplied both local consumption and regional trade networks. The material culture shows evidence of technological innovation and specialisation that enhanced productivity while creating distinctive regional products that could compete effectively in interregional and international markets. The development of regional trade networks represented both a consequence of political fragmentation and a contributing factor to continued economic integration among the Rus's principalities. Archaeological evidence from trading centres reveals the establishment of regular commercial relationships between previously unified territories, including the development of standardized commercial practices and the creation of permanent facilities for interregional trade. The material culture shows the circulation of goods, technologies and artistic influences that maintained cultural connections even as political unity dissolved, creating economic interdependencies that would persist despite political conflicts. Craft specialization reached unprecedented levels during this period as regional centers developed particular expertise in producing specific types of goods that could be exchanged for products manufactured elsewhere. Archaeological evidence from workshop sites reveals the emergence of highly specialized production techniques, including advanced metalworking methods, sophisticated textile production, and innovative pottery techniques that created distinctive regional products. The material culture shows the development of quality control systems and standardized production methods that enabled craft specialists to maintain consistent quality while increasing production volumes to meet growing demand from expanding trade networks. The Congress of Lübeck in 1097 AD represented a crucial attempt by the Rurikid princes to address the growing problems created by political fragmentation while preserving the essential features of the rota system that had become entrenched in Rus's political culture. Archaeological evidence from the Congress site reveals the substantial preparations made for this gathering, including the construction of temporary facilities for housing the various princely retinues and the establishment of ceremonial spaces appropriate for conducting high-level diplomatic negotiations. The material culture associated with the Congress includes evidence of elaborate gift exchanges, ceremonial weapons, and diplomatic documents that demonstrate the sophisticated protocol requirements of interprincely negotiations. The agreements reached at Lübeck established the principle that each prince should hold his patrimony as hereditary property while maintaining collective responsibility for defending Russ's territories against external enemies. Archaeological evidence from the period following the Congress reveals attempts to implement these agreements through the standardization of certain administrative practices and the establishment of regular communication systems between principalities. The material culture shows evidence of renewed cooperation in some areas, including coordinated defensive preparations and the resumption of interrupted trade relationships that had been disrupted by interprincely conflicts. The codification of princely relationships attempted at Lübeck reflected sophisticated understanding of the complex genealogical and territorial issues that had created ongoing conflicts among the Rurikid descendants. Archaeological evidence reveals the development of specialized record-keeping systems designed to track inheritance rights and territorial claims, including the creation of detailed genealogical charts and the establishment of archives for storing succession-related documents. The material culture associated with these administrative innovations includes evidence of legal consultation procedures and the development of arbitration mechanisms for resolving disputes without resort to military conflict. The maintenance of nominal unity under the Rurikid dynasty required the continued recognition of Kiev's ceremonial precedence and the Grand Prince's theoretical authority over the entire realm. Archaeological evidence from Kiev reveals efforts to maintain the city's status as the premier Rus' centre through continued investment in monumental construction projects and the preservation of institutions that symbolize central authority. The material culture shows the persistence of certain unified practices, including the continued use of common legal principles and the maintenance of shared religious traditions that provided cultural cohesion despite political fragmentation. The limitations of the Lübeck agreements became apparent within years of their conclusion, as the fundamental tensions created by the rota system continue to generate conflicts that the Congress had failed to resolve. Archaeological evidence from border regions reveals the resumption of fortification construction and military preparations that indicate ongoing territorial disputes despite the diplomatic agreements. The material culture shows evidence of renewed competition between principalities, including attempts to attract craftsmen and merchants from rival territories and the development of alternative trade routes designed to bypass competitors' commercial networks. The emergence of distinct princely dynasties within individual territories represented a fundamental departure from the original conception of the rota system, as regional rulers began establishing hereditary claims to specific principalities rather than accepting rotation through this traditional hierarchy. Archaeological evidence from princely burial sites reveals the development of distinct dynastic burial practices and the construction of family mausoleums that emphasized hereditary continuity within particular territories. The material culture associated with these developments includes evidence of genealogical record-keeping systems and the creation of dynastic symbols that distinguished individual princely lines from their Rurikid cousins. The military innovations that emerged during this period reflected both the reduced scale of individual princely forces and the need for more flexible tactical approaches to the complex conflicts that characterized interprincely warfare. Archaeological evidence from military sites reveals the development of lighter, more mobile military equipment and the adoption of siege techniques adapted to the smaller scale of regional conflicts. The material culture shows evidence of technological innovation in weapons production and the development of specialized military roles that reflected the changing nature of warfare in the fragmented political environment. The cultural consequences of political fragmentation included both the loss of certain unified traditions and the emergence of distinctive regional cultural developments that enriched the overall diversity of Rus's civilization. Archaeological evidence from cultural sites reveals the continued production of high-quality artistic works and the development of regional artistic traditions that combine traditional elements with local innovations. The material culture shows evidence of continued cultural exchange between regions despite political divisions, including the circulation of artistic influences and the maintenance of shared literary and religious traditions. The religious developments during this period reflected both the continued unity of Christian faith and the emergence of regional variations in religious practice and institutional organization. Archaeological evidence from religious sites reveals the construction of numerous churches and monasteries throughout the Rus's territories, each reflecting local architectural traditions while maintaining essential Christian liturgical requirements. The material culture associated with religious institutions shows evidence of continued theological education and the production of religious literature that maintained doctrinal unity while accommodating regional cultural preferences. The educational and intellectual achievements of this period demonstrated that political fragmentation did not necessarily impede cultural development, as regional centres established schools and libraries that rivaled those found in Kiev during Yaroslav's reign. Archaeological evidence from educational institutions reveals the continued production of manuscripts and the development of regional intellectual traditions that contributed to the overall richness of Rus's learning. The material culture shows evidence of scholarly exchange between regions and the maintenance of intellectual networks that transcended political boundaries. The long-term implications of the developments initiated during this period would fundamentally shape the subsequent history of the Rus's territories, as the precedents established for regional autonomy and the institutional frameworks created for managing political fragmentation would persist long after the original circumstances that created them had disappeared. The Rota system's unintended consequences had transformed a unified realm into a collection of related but increasingly independent principalities, each developing its own institutional traditions and cultural identity, while maintaining nominal allegiance to shared Rurikid heritage and Christian faith. This transformation represented not the decline of Rus's civilization, but rather its evolution into a more complex and diverse form that would prove remarkably resilient in the face of future challenges, including the Mongol invasions that would test the strength of these newly autonomous political structures in ways that their creators could never have anticipated.